far so good, you know. It's another day on the homestead.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining me. This is going to be a little bit of a weird video to watch, at least. The people listening to the audio won't think it's weird, but you're keeping your identity private, and I certainly respect that. So we'll just have a back and forth today where my video is the only one showing. But perhaps to get this started off, why don't you introduce yourself to me and anyone who's listening?
Sure. Well, my name's Craig. A homesteader, permaculture, homeschooling crazy person up here in the Northeast. So the leaves are already starting to change colors, so the homesteading stuff comes to an end here in a couple of months. But homeschooling just kicked off 2 weeks ago. So out of one thing and into the next.
Cool. So yeah, I mean, this is a topic that I know, well, I'm very interested in. I know a lot of Bitcoiners are interested in kind of sovereignty and independence in many areas of their life, perhaps starting with financial sovereignty as being one of the most important, and then looking around your life and saying, well, what other areas am I overly dependent on something external to myself? And do I want to establish a greater degree of sovereignty over it? And I think that sort of mentality is causing a lot of people to look at having more food sovereignty, having more space to do what they want, in terms of where they're living. Of course, if they have children, maybe wanting them not to be subject to the industrial state education system and wanting to inculcate in them a different set of values and different education of various kinds. And so I think, for those reasons and likely a lot more, these subjects are becoming of increasing interest to our crowd. So maybe you can just tell me, like, was it Bitcoin first, or was it these things first for you? That which one came first?
Well, I've always been a bit of a pain in the ass. So that's kind of my history. If somebody ever put up a rule and said, this is a hard and fast rule, I'd always try to find a way around it. Just
My
because
man.
if there's a rule that says you can't do a thing and it doesn't seem like it's hurting anybody, well, is it really that much of a rule, or is it more of a suggestion? And will people get that mad if you break it? So ever since I was like a little kid, that was always the way. It's like, how much homework do I need to do? That was my big thing in school.
Right.
Um, so in elementary school, you get an hour's worth of homework. In middle school, they were giving me 4 hours, up to 4 hours of homework in a day. And so I
Jesus.
I kind of came up with this thought in my head, like, I want to go ride my bike. I want to do other things. I don't want to be doing all this homework. So rather than do the homework, I found ways around it. Some very interesting ways. In some cases, I had to get very crafty with the mail system because teachers would send home notes, and that was going to be a problem. So I had to intercept those, stuff like that. But I found my way through, right? So that's my mentality when it comes to the schooling thing. At least we can start there. Is,
Sure.
well, why stress a kid out with an overwhelming amount of work when what you're really trying to get out of is an education? Um, in my experience with kids, at least, going through the school system and doing the homeschooling thing that I do now, is every kid is very different and everybody has a different way of learning. And putting everybody into one box and sitting them in a chair and saying, for the next 7 hours, for the next 5 days, for the next 180 days of the school year, this is what we're going to do. And I saw kids struggle when they didn't need to. And I was one of those kids. So
Mhm.
it was always in the back of my head, like, man, what can I do to just avoid as much of this bullshit as possible? And I found my ways, and they weren't always successful. And I caught a couple of whoopings on account of maybe overdoing it a little bit, but I made my way through, graduated college. And at that point, had this idea in my head that if I ever have kids, it'd be an interesting way to see if I can not have them go through those same stresses and struggles. So that was where I kind of got the start with the homeschooling. So to answer your question, homeschooling came first, then came permaculture, then came Bitcoin.
Interesting. Yeah, as you're saying that, I can relate a lot, and I'm sure we all can, because the educational system in most places is not set up for customization and for accounting for the different idiosyncrasies and interests and curiosities, temperaments of broad variety of individuals. It's like, cookie cutter approach. Everyone goes through the same meat grinder, and some it's compatible to a certain degree with some, and it's incompatible with others. And you sink or swim based on that effectively, and it's so education has always been, I was very much the same, right? I was like, this is bullshit. You think of it, it's such a, you wonder why so many kids check out, like, as you said, you stuff them in a classroom in an uncomfortable chair for 8-9 hours a day, and you force feed them stuff that they may not be curious about, much of which is not going to really contribute to their intellectual development, nor have that much real world application. And so of course, any sensible, rational, thoughtful child is just going to say, why am I doing this? This is pointless. And they're going to check out and go down other avenues perhaps. And if there's not, first of all, if that child is not necessarily like, doesn't take much initiative with finding another productive path to go down, right? Like another intellectual pursuit to pursue instead of that, then they might go down destructive pathways. And of course, we see that a lot in the world today. And, I often reflect on the circumstance of, we feed children crap, right? Before they're sent off to school, they're eating Cheerios and Fruit Loops and, high fructose corn syrup bullshit. And then we put them in an environment where it's physically uncomfortable, it's not intellectually stimulating. And then when they react negatively to that, as expected, we drug them up and suggest that it's a problem that they have, not a problem of the circumstance and the environment we're putting them in. It's so completely broken. And this is part of the reason why I'm interested in people that are doing homeschooling and exploring other methods and avenues of education, and why I'm super excited for the types of education that are going to be available to kids as we move into a Bitcoin standard, as we move into an era where people have more capacity and interest and motivation for different forms of education, providing them, accessing them for their children and all that kind of stuff. So that's part of my motivation for speaking with people like yourself. But yeah, tell me about the permaculture aspect of things.
All right. Well, so I don't know what it was. I had an injury at work and was put out of work for 3 to 6 months was the prognosis after I had had surgery on my arm. And I just kind of fell into this spot. I was like, what am I going to do while I'm all jammed up when I only got one arm to use? And I've always been interested in gardening. I had a little garden when I was a kid, tomatoes, cucumbers, that sort of thing. But it was like a little 20 by 10 spot behind, I grew up in a mobile home park, so that we didn't have a lot of room. But the kids, we all ran the neighborhoods and everybody had a little backyard garden. And I was always that kid that was, hey, check out this little bee over here. Look at this little bug. Look what I found. And we're always just kind of running around experimenting and figuring out, oh, what is this thing? But when I was a kid, there was no internet. So it was like, oh, did you know that this bug can kill you if you look at it the wrong way? Like kids had little rumors of stuff, it's like, and I was always fascinated with all this stuff. I spent all my time when I was a kid in nature, running around the woods, fishing, hunting, just, flipping over rocks. What the hell's under the rock, right? That kind of stuff. So awesome. It's always been my mentality. So when I had this injury, I was stuck with a summer with essentially nothing to do except collect a check and busy myself with one arm, right? So you can figure out, there's only a few things you can do. So I decided, well, I'm gonna start another little garden. But where I was, it wasn't really like a thing that could work out for the long term. I was renting. So I said, well, let me put in a little time doing some research. And I stumbled across this term permaculture. And I was like, well, what the hell is this? And it seemed to align more with my mentality of doing things. Like, we're going to take a wild approach and develop a system that's permanent. It doesn't require any real inputs, that will sustain itself for presumably forever. And I was like, well, tell me more. And so that got me started. And then once I resolved all the health issues and everything else, turns out one of the things that happens when you got nothing but a bunch of time is your wife gets pregnant. So, so we had a little one on the way. And my thought process at that point was, well, we're really I got to square my shit up. And, some period after he was born, the financial crisis happened, right? So it was like, boom, I got a baby, I don't have a house, and everything just went to shit. And I thought, well, now's the time, right? I had some money saved and I thought, well, if I'm going to pull the trigger on buying a house or buying a piece of property, you're not going to get a better rate than, if you've got good credit and you've got some money in the bank. They were practically giving houses away at that point, right after, once the dust had settled.
Right.
So I bought a house. We got, almost 10 acres of land, and it's like the perfect place to kind of pull one of these permaculture stunts at. So I just got to digging. I was like, I'm gonna dig while the kids nap. I'm gonna make swales. I'm gonna plant trees, and it just kind of started. And before you knew it, I was like spending all of my time, whenever I wasn't dealing with the kids, I was digging a hole, planting a tree, building a swale, whatever it was that I was doing, and I was obsessed. So it just kind of took off from there. And like, here I am, 12 years later, something like that. And I got more food than I know what to do with.
That's awesome. So
go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I guess there's many different ways to approach permaculture, or it's a broad term that can potentially encompass a lot of different approaches and growing different things and finding different harmonies and stuff like that. So in your, what you've built for yourself, is this like all plants, or are there animals? And is this something that you live completely off of, more or less? You don't rely on any other sources for food? Like, can you clarify that for me a little bit?
Sure. Well, what I started with was, you start with plants, right? So my first big project was to build a food forest. So that's, perennial plants, right? So I got a lot of herbs and root crops, stuff that's going to last, that it produces year after year. I planted in a bunch of trees, and I'll give you an idea as to how easy this was. I did it with a spade shovel and like $1,000. That's how I got started. I was like, I got a shovel and I've got, we had a little bit of money. So I said to the wife, I said, hey, what would you think about me planting a bunch of trees? She said, how many trees? I said, well, let's just come up with a budget first. And my proposed budget was more than $1,000. And we eventually agreed on $1,000 was probably a good place to start, because I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So, and I went down to the nursery, and it just happened to be the right time of year. And I bought a bunch of apple trees. I bought, let's see what else we got. The apple trees. I got walnuts. I got chestnuts, hazelnuts, all kinds of other fruit trees, raspberries, blueberries, blackberries, a bunch of weird stuff that no one's ever heard of. I went to the place and I was like, what else can I buy? I've got $5 left, that sort of thing. And I just went crazy with it. I brought all these boxes and bags home. And I had taken my son with me, and we bought some, we got some grapes and some other things. And I just got busy planting trees. And so we had the trees, and we had the nut shrubs and the cane fruit and the cherries and all kinds of stuff that I had bought, and I planted it all in. In the first year, you don't do anything with it. You just kind of plant it, water it, mulch it, and you hope that some of it survives. So in the meantime, I turned to my wife and I said, how about chickens? And she was like, what do you mean chickens? We got 2 kids, we got all this other stuff going on. You just bought, essentially a food forest. Why don't we wait? And I said, well, if we get the chickens now, that'll give me time. And so I'm like, kind of was conning my way into my next project. Like, but if I don't have anything to do, then I'm just going to sit around. And so like, well, let's start with some chickens. So she said, okay, we'll get some chickens. So the first time I went down to the farm supply store, I bought 10 chickens. And then 3 days later, I bought 25 more, because that's the kind of person I am. And so we added chickens, and we've had, actually, one of those chickens is still kicking along. She's 12 years. I think she's coming up on 11 years old now.
Wow.
So she's crazy, that bird. But, so we started chickens, and the chickens helped out in the food forest. They eat the bugs, they eat the grubs, you scatter a little bit of feed for them, and they kind of clean things up. They scratch around, they do a little bit of weeding, and it turns out that they lay eggs, and that became, with 35 chickens, it's kind of like 30 eggs a day, and that was a little too much. So we had to start selling eggs. And it turns out, with this whole permaculture thing, if you have a problem, if you have a surplus, the answer is right in front of your face. Well, just sell the eggs, and then you can, bring in some money so you can buy ducks. And so like, that was the process. Every time I would go a little bit overboard with the project, and then I'd have a surplus, and then I'd turn that surplus into something so I could start my next project. And it just kind of snowballed from there. So right now we've got chickens, pigs. In the past, I've had ducks. I've got rabbits. We raise rabbits for meat, and for pet sales and stuff like that. So, and it's, every year I'm always adding into the thing. So it's busy around here. And to the question of how much do I produce, we produce all of our own fruit. So I don't have to buy fruit unless I want something that I can't grow here. As a matter of fact, my kids are outside right now picking apples, and I'm expecting something in the neighborhood of 100 pounds of apples a day for the next month.
Wow.
So most of those go to the pigs. So that's, free food. So we call it apple bacon.
Right. Right.
Right. So it's
and no cows? Is there a particular reason for that?
Yeah, I can't do the piece of land that I've got doesn't really fit with a cow. It's on a hillside, and I have concerns about erosion and stuff like that. When I first moved in, it was an old hay field, so the soil was pretty well degraded. And so I've spent the last 10 or so years basically just doing as much as I can to just keep feeding that soil. And so in the past I've had a goat. We had a goat for a short minute, but that was not a good fit. That goat drove my dog nuts. And so the goat went back home. Well, I have a Maremma. He's a sheepdog, right? So like a livestock guardian dog, and he owns everything that goes outside. So for him, those chickens are his chickens. Those rabbits are his rabbits. Those pigs are his pigs. My kids are his kids. So if my kids, they get running off, he'll chase after them, and he'll make sure that they stay in the yard. I don't have to fence the kids in. The dog does that job for me.
Oh, that's awesome.
But as goats go, they're great at mowing things. And I thought, well, I can get this goat to kind of mow the field a little for me and kind of prune back some of these trees and stuff. But the goat was, as they do, they butt heads, right? So I didn't want my dog getting a concussion or anything like that.
Didn't get along with the dog.
No, the dog dogs want to play, and they get down on their paws and they use bark, and he's a loud dog. And the goat wasn't having it. And the goat took a run at my dog one time and damn near KO'd him. So I was like, maybe not goat. But I'd like to try it again if I could fence the goats.
Right.
And I'm in talks with somebody about sheep, because I think I could probably pull it off with a couple of sheep, but it requires fencing. And to fence a hillside is kind of a pain in the ass.
Mm. So the question regarding food independence, I assume you just source meat elsewhere, and for most of your other needs, they're kind of well met by the current operation?
Yeah. So I do have to, if I'm eating beef, we have to buy that in. And usually I'd like to try to buy a half a cow a year, but a lot of times it's just, hey man, I got to hit the grocery store because I don't really have a lot of freezer space at this moment. But we eat quite a lot of rabbit. Rabbit turns out that, they fuck like rabbits. And so you kind of end up with a lot of them pretty quick.
Right.
And I realize, a lot of people, talk about, well, rabbits aren't all that great, but, for a little animal that's, it's basically meat on 4 legs, and you can just take them when you want them. So I don't have to worry about storing them, in a freezer. I think one of the things with having a cow, even if I could pull it off, it's a 2-year growth process. And because I'm way up north, I got to feed a lot of hay. If I were to do that, I've only got grass from late May until early October. So I'd have to feed a lot of hay, which would make it kind of cost prohibitive. So the rabbits do a pretty good job with that. And every couple of years I raise out a couple of pigs. So my pork and my rabbit stuff, which I kind of substitute rabbit for chicken, because once you have chickens and they're laying eggs, it's let the chickens do the egg laying thing. And I'm not gonna, we've eaten a couple, but compared to rabbit, it's just, I'd rather not. The rabbit's way better. Yeah. Really? Oh yeah, way better. Yeah.
Taste wise, you mean?
Taste wise, it's got a higher amount of protein, way easier to clean, no special equipment. If I were to go outside right now, I could have a rabbit on my cutting board in the house in less than 5 minutes.
Really?
Yeah. They're amazing.
How so? How do you skin it?
I've got a little rig out back on the backside of their hutch. And basically it's just 2 screws that are drilled into a 2x6 board. And you basically, I don't know how graphic you want me to get, but you do what's called
you might as well.
We do call it a cervical dislocation. So basically you hold the rabbit by its back feet with one hand, and you hold its head with your other hand, and you basically just bend and pull. The neck snaps pretty quickly. It's kind of a quick, you're out. And then from there we hang them up, and then you just cut the head off with a knife. And then you just basically you cut around the fur on the back legs, and you can just pull it down like you're pulling off a wet sock.
Right.
And then after that, the guts come out, livers, kidneys, heart, lungs, that goes into a bin for the dog. Cook that up for the dog. And then the rest of it's all basically clean white meat ready to go.
Wow. Had you grown up around any of this, or was this all brand new when you started, buying the first apple trees and stuff?
Well, like I said, done a little bit of like regular gardening as a kid, and I ran a
Yeah.
landscaping business for a while. So I was pretty familiar with, mulching and all these sorts of things. I did spend quite a lot of time in the woods hunting as a kid as well. So I'm familiar. I've done
Right.
some deer hunting, and we've dispatched. I had a guy I worked with in Pennsylvania for a while where I would. He had a dairy barn, and he had a problem with pigeons. So I'd shoot a lot of pigeons, and then we breast those out and stuff. So
Right.
and with fishing and everything else. So I'm no stranger ever since I was like a little kid to dispatching an animal. So that, despite, I still say my prayers and I go, I'm sorry about this. This is going to suck for about 8 seconds, but you'll be, you'll be on the other side soon.
Right. Right.
That's a
Yeah,
big thing too. It's like staying respectful of it and just not, never making it a chore. Make it something that you appreciate. I think that's a big important thing with the permaculture thing. So,
yeah, totally. So, I mean, this has turned in, again, from a few apple trees to, kind of a going concern now that's at least greatly contributing to your sustenance, and all the while you're kind of fostering an equilibrium or harmony and rejuvenation of the environment that you're in, like your land. What are your thoughts about this whole thing? Like, has it changed your impression or perspective on land, on nature, on how all this stuff fits together? Has it changed your perspective on health? Has it changed your perspective on, what's kind of the big takeaways after you've been doing this for over a decade?
For me, I think the thing is that I'm always finding something new, as far as like interconnectedness.
Right.
It's kind of almost like, and I'm sure we'll probably get there, but like with Bitcoin, it hits in so many different places that you wouldn't expect it to pop up, right? Like when you first kind of start reading or learning or watching or listening, you go like, what the hell is going on here? But it seems to be working for people, right? So with permaculture, it's that sort of mentality. It's like, all right, so I get the food forest going, I get the regular garden going. Great, that's fruit and vegetables, and I don't have to worry about the fruit because that'll just keep growing every year. And as far as the annual stuff, I plant that every year. And then you've got animals, and then, well, what am I going to do with? I've got a pile of manure. Well, that's fertilizer. Well, I've got all this bedding. Well, that's mulch. And then everything just connects to another thing. And so for me, the biggest takeaway is, even after 10 years of this, 12 years, and then, essentially my entire life with, nature stuff, it's all so connected, and it's hard to figure out, like, is there an end to this? Like, where does the whole thing come together where you go, I finally finished it? Like when I was a kid, when the internet was first a thing, you could finish the internet, right? Like you could like go online.
You visited the last page. Well done.
Right. I finished I remember it came with a book, like a phone book. Right? I was like, oh, I got a Pepsi.com, huh? What's that all about? Right. So, but like it's not that way now, and you couldn't finish it in a million lifetimes, right? Because you could do a million lifetimes a million times and you'd still never get it. Even if you just started with what we have today, you'd never finish it all. And the same thing goes with permaculture. So I'm always learning something new. Every time I think I've got my system figured out, nature throws a curveball. And to me, I always laugh. So I'll be outside and I'm looking at something, laughing my ass off, and I'll hear somebody from inside the house go, "What the hell are you laughing at?" And I'm like, it never dawned on me that this could happen. Like I couldn't give a great example off the bat, but there's like goofy little things that happen, right? Like I never thought, okay, I'll give you an example with the goat. Oh no, actually I'll give you an example with the pigs. So like 5 years ago, I was raising out this batch of pigs, and I'd gone up, and they're inside of electric net fencing. And so I turn the electric fence off, I go inside and I'm feeding the pigs, and here's an apple for you, here's an apple for you, kind of checking on condition. I put the bucket down, and the bucket was already empty, had nothing nothing in the bucket, but a regular 5-gallon bucket, right? So it's got that little metal handle on it. So I'm talking to this pig like an idiot. And then I hear this noise behind me, like shaking and screaming pig. And I'm like, what the hell is this? I turn around. The pig had stuck its head in the bucket and wrapped the metal loop around its chin. So it was stuck in the bucket. And it's running around in circles trying to get the bucket off. And it's just screaming. And I was like, I would have never thought that a pig could do that. Like, you wouldn't think that that interaction could happen. It's like, holy, right now, all of a sudden I've got a 200-pound animal with a 5-gallon bucket stuck on its head and it's pissed. What am I going to do about that? So that was, it was an adventure, but I'm out there laughing my ass off because it's kind of funny. And we resolved the issue and it's like, all right, moving on to the next thing. And there's millions of things like that have happened in the last 10 years.
Right. Yeah, I imagine it must be cool because, I mean, we're so if you're a modern city dweller, let's say, or even like, anyone who's not basically doing what you're doing, we're so detached from, the cycles of the seasons and the natural world and how it all comes together. But I can imagine being so up close and personal with it. Like, one, you're confronted with the chaos of it all, as you just described, like all this crazy shit that happens, but simultaneously you're confronted with how it harmonizes together, right? Like how it all kind of gels if you put the pieces together properly, or at least it gels sufficiently to be able to manage the chaos. At least that's my impression from speaking with other people like yourself that have been doing this. I mean, has that been your impression as well?
Yeah, for the most part, it's like the peace comes when things work. And then when there's chaos, it provides like a new thing to think about. So I'll spend time, at night after everything's shut down, everybody's fed, everybody's got their water, shelters are locked down. And I'll think, what is the thing that I could do to make the system better? And then if I implemented that thing, could I inadvertently make this worse?
Right.
Right. So if I plant this particular crop this year, or if I raise this particular animal and the weather goes to dog shit on me, what things could, what could be my hangups? But it's always something that you're always learning. And so you're always kind of on your toes. I'm always looking out a window if I'm inside, like today, and I'm like looking, I've got, a grape arbor that's basically full of grapes that are gonna be ripe in a couple of days. Like, I'm like waiting on it, kind of waiting and waiting and waiting. And then the birds show up. And then you've got a blue jay sitting on the railing looking at the grapes going, can I have one of these? You can have one. And then you got 2 blue jays, and then it's like, can we have one each? And then before you know it, so it's
right.
There's always these crazy little things that happen. It's magic. And what makes it even better is like raising kids in it, because my kids essentially grew up with this system and they've grown with it. So when, let's say my son was 2, all of our fruit trees weren't bearing any fruit. Maybe like the first year, maybe one thing, like the raspberries did a little something, right? It's like, but you take that kid out and he helped plant the raspberries, these little, at the time, it's like a little ball of dirt with some roots sticking out of it. And he's like, oh, what are we doing? Hey dad, why this? Like, don't worry, come September, you're going to appreciate this. And then they watch the things grow up. And then it's like, can I go outside and pick the raspberries, dad? It's like, before you know it, they're disappearing into the food forest, and they come back full with their arms full of food. And it's like, that's magic to me. It's like,
man, yeah, that must be so cool.
Just to watch them plow through stuff. And that's another thing, right? It's like, if you've got little ones, or, I mean, anytime you start, I feel like it's just as amazing to me as it is to my kids. They see the flowers bloom in the springtime, and then they watch the fruit set, and then they watch the fruit ripen, and then you're all sitting there waiting, as each tree kind of comes to fruit, and they don't all fruit at the same time, right? So like when I planted I planted 5 apple trees, and we've probably got like 25 more that were already here. But to watch the kids sit there and be like, is it almost ready? Is it almost ready? And it looks ready, and you try it and it's not quite ready. Shitty apple, right? And they pitch it, right. And then it's like, oh, well, what do we do with the shitty apples? Well, give them to the chickens. Chickens like them, great. And then, so there's like this, like they're learning as they're growing. If you have something you don't want to eat, they'll eat it. And if they won't eat it, the worms will eat it. And then the chickens will eat the worms, and then I still get eggs. And so they start putting it all together. And before you know it, I send them out and they come back they report to me what's right, what's ready, what they need. So, like this afternoon, I said, hey guys, we need to, we got to pick apples, we got to pick raspberries, grapes are starting to get on. There's all these things coming to fruit, and it's like they know how to handle it now. So I don't have to even tell them what to do. It's like, here's a bowl, here's a bag, handle it. And they do. And then they're responsible for their own food. And then snack time gets way easier that way.
Yeah, that's so cool, man. And most of us have probably had some kind of experience, like, whether it's you're out foraging blueberries or mushrooms and you eat those, or maybe you've got a small, tiny little like home garden and you eat that stuff. But like the fruit or the food that you're the one that's tending, you're the one that's cultivating, you're the one that's like making sure it comes to fruition. It just tastes better, like that relationship that you've established with it. Maybe it's a sense of gratitude, or maybe it's just a sense of appreciation or whatever. But like it always seems to be the case that like the closer you are to it, the more you've put into it, and you reap what you sow, perhaps. So the more you put into it, the more you seem to get out of it in terms of like the pleasure of the taste of the fruit or whatever, rather than just like you're in the grocery store, you grab something off the shelf or out of the fresh counter where the produce is or whatever, and you get home and you eat it, and it's just so monotonous, it's so routine. But when you're there every step of the way, and as you say, like you're waiting, like, is today the day we can harvest it? No, it's not ready yet. Is today no, not ready yet. And when it's finally ready and you eat it, you're like, oh, that is so fucking good. I got to imagine that's pretty awesome. I've only experienced it in bursts, not on your scale.
Well, it is one of those amazing things. And the great thing about doing the permaculture side of things, or doing it at least in this way, is that we do like succession planting. So again, like of the 5 apple trees that I planted, when I started with it, I thought, well, I don't want them all ripening at the same time, right? Because what am I going to do with 5 trees? If each tree, after 5 years, if they're putting out a couple of 100 pounds of apples each, I can't deal with 1,000 pounds of apples in one day. So I planted a late summer apple, an early fall, a mid fall, a late fall, and an early winter apple. And now, from the end of like August all the way through sometimes into December, I'm getting apples, and it's always a different variety. So, I tell the kids, well, keep an eye on the summer trees, because they're getting close. And we don't even have to worry about that winter tree. It's months away before we have to worry about that. But there's all these little things that are in between, right? Raspberries, cherries, grapes, hazelnuts. We're going to get our first harvest of chestnuts this year, right? So that's another thing when you're talking about stacking stuff through time. I planted those chestnut trees 10, 11 years ago. They
Wow.
They were like these teeny tiny little sticks. And I don't know if you know much about chestnuts, but like there used to be a shitload of them. And then the European chestnut blight came to the United States, and it wiped out a good majority of the American chestnuts. So there's only like, I don't know, they say a few that live, in the wild, and people have gone out and they've harvested those nuts off those trees, and they've been trying to find an American chestnut that will deal with this blight and not die. So when I went to the nursery, I was talking to the guy and I said, what's the deal with the chestnuts? And he said, well, there's the ones that we've planted from this stock have been pretty hardy. He's like, if you plant them and they last 5 years, they'll probably last forever, which is, it's a gamble, right? It's like, you're going to spend $20 on this tree. It's like a stick. You got to find a place for it, but you can't treat it as if it's a stick that's only going to last maybe 5 years. You got to treat it like this is going to be a giant tree that's like 60 feet tall, 50 feet wide, that, you got to plant it, but you got to make room for the damn thing, all the while knowing that it might not last anyway. So it's a big plan. And here we are again, like I said, 10, 11 years later, and it's got nuts on it. It's like, they're way up at the top of the tree. And I'm like, finally, like you see them up there and you're like, oh man, I can't wait. And then, and I'm fully expecting, if there's maybe 50 nuts on each tree and there's only a couple of them, what if the squirrels get to them first, right? That thing could hit the ground, and that squirrel could be right there, and boom, they're gone. So, but that they've lasted, I'm pumped. But that I might still not get them after all this, I have to accept.
Right.
That's the thing, right? There's like this humility that goes with it too, right? You have to kind of, all right, I planted it, I grew it, I mulched it, I cared for it, I didn't let anything kill it or run it over, or I didn't let the deer jack up the the side of the tree, I've taken all this care and finally I'm getting fruit and then it's gone.
Right.
God
Right.
damn it.
All this care and effort, but maybe the rewards won't be mine.
Yeah.
I
And
have to
this,
accept that.
yeah, exactly. And that's kind of one of those things that goes, it's one of the kind of, I don't know if you want to call it an ethic or just one of the principles of permaculture is that, you're going to have to share with nature, whether you like it or not. So how much do you want to share? And should you plant a little extra? So
Yeah. I see.
every year, certain things do better than others. And so like this last year, my sour cherries didn't do anything, but they provided like 40 quarts of cherries last year. So should I be mad that they didn't produce this year? I got 40 quarts last year. I mean, how many cherries are you going to eat? Right. So like,
Yeah.
yeah, take a year off. I'll catch up with you next year. But my my sweet cherry tree, it did produce fruit, but because the sour cherries weren't there at the same time, the squirrels, every kind of songbird you can imagine, they sit in the tree and they eat a half a cherry, and then they move to the next cherry and they eat half of that one and they eat the half of the next one. And you're sitting there looking at it like, guys, just leave me some. But this year, if I got a handful out of like what would have been 10 pounds of cherries, but it's like that's the cycle nature kind of works with. So it's like if you've got a lot of cherries, you're gonna get some for yourself. But if one tree produces, but the other 3 or 5 trees don't, you're gonna be contending with the birds. So you might want to plant some other stuff too.
Yeah. I think that's such a great and fascinating and often overlooked point regarding our kind of quote unquote progress that has led many of us to be disconnected with the source of our food and the way in which nature works and all that kind of stuff. Because when you interact with it on that level, it there's an incentive, or it almost forces an ethic upon you, like you were just saying. Like if you don't, it's going to humble you. It's going to make sure that you are. It's going to impress upon you the importance of patience, on the importance of accepting that you're not always going to get everything that you want, that all the work that you put into it is not necessarily going to accrue to you in terms of reward. Like these are all genuine ethics that the relationship that you constitute between yourself and the earth and nature is instilling in you via that relationship. And if you're removed entirely from that and you're not being instilled with that, and instead everything is just at your fingertips when you want it, how you want it, you don't have to, there's no element of sacrifice, there's no element of patience, no element of humility. It's all just there at your fingertips whenever you want it. Well, that's a very real change in how an individual develops, because they're different values, different ethics are being instilled in them through different experiences. And so, on that level, because we often criticize, fiat culture and all this kind of stuff in Bitcoin land. I mean, it's very reasonable or very apparent or it's very easy to see why, at least in part, we would have, our shifting value sets and ethics have shifted as a result of, modernity, broadly speaking, and being disconnected from the very real ethics that are typically, or have been for most of our history, imbued and instilled in people as a result of that relationship that they necessarily had to constitute between themselves and the natural world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this goes right back into the homeschooling thing. How you get out of it what you put into it. So in the same way that, I could take the easy route and go to the grocery store and just buy this food. It's, the money's not an issue, right? It's like I can just go get it, right? It's provided it's there, right? Provided that it's there. And I could do the same thing with school. I could put my kids on a bus. I could send them down the road, and what would I get for it, right? I'd get 7 hours of my day that I could just do whatever I want to do, right? I could get a job, which, I'm not doing that shit. I've got enough going on. But or you can take it into your own hands and just say like, okay, well, look, what does it take to plant a tree, right? Like you dig a hole, you put some fertilizer in it, some compost, some manure, whatever it's going to be, put the tree in there and just make sure it's watered. Presuming everything else goes smoothly, it'll fruit, it'll do its thing. And the same basic principle applies to the education of a child. if you take it into your own hands, you're there all the time. You're watching that child as they learn. You're learning how they learn, right? So my two kids are completely different learners. I've got one that's wicked analytical, and I've got one that's like free spirited, just like show me something interesting and then leave me alone, right? Like that sort of thing, right? It's like they're two different education styles. If what am I supposed to take a gamble? Like this was the kind of the argument that I made when we first started considering homeschooling, because it wasn't really like I was for sure going to do this, right? Like me and my wife, you have to have this conversation, right? Like what's best for the kids and how does that impact your life? And what are you going to do if it doesn't work? What are you going to do when you can't teach a subject? Well, okay, we'll get there when we get there, right? But like from the ages of 0 until 10, like all you have to do is teach them how to read, which if you can read, you can teach somebody how to read for the most part. As far as math is concerned, what do you like? Addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and some basic other functions. Like it's not, I mean, it's not that difficult if you've made it through high school. If you've made it through high school, presumably you can teach elementary school. I mean, you've got 8 years experience being a middle schooler or a high schooler, right?
Right.
So my thought process, and my wife and I talked about this. Like, I'll give you just a brief how we got there. My son was, getting ready to get to school age, and we were looking at, okay, what are our options? Well, there's the public school, there's a private Montessori school type thing, and there's some other interesting type schools that are around our area that are kind of like niche little interesting things. And the state is great about the homeschooling thing. They're like, as long as you take it upon yourself and submit the paperwork saying essentially that you're doing it, we'll have somebody check in with you just to make sure that you're just not some crazy person living in a hole somewhere, just trying to keep your kids out of the spotlight. We'll let you kind of do your thing. And so we first looked at one of these little interesting kind of niche schools, and it was kind of lackluster. It was, well, we just kind of let the kids do their thing, but we don't really involve them. We'll read to them, but we don't ask them to read back to us. If they want to do math, we let them, but we don't force it. So it was kind of like, is this daycare or is this school? Right. At least for me, that was like, if I'm sending you and I'm paying for this to happen, like my kid should come home with an education of some sort. So I was kind of out on that. It was a lot of, for as much as I'm pumped about the whole permaculture thing, there is a little bit of cult in permaculture. And it was kind of one of those sort of things.
A little bit of cult in everything.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, there's always that side niche that shows up once something gets popular enough and they want to turn it into a religion, which I'm not against, but not for me. So I said, well, okay, well, let's check out this Montessori school thing. And it was kind of a lot of the same. It was a lot of like really soft kids. Like we went to the open house, and it was a lot of doughy looking kids that didn't look like they ever saw the sunshine. And the teachers, you ever get a handshake from somebody and it seems like they just handed you a wet clam? You know what I mean? It's just like, ugh, come on. Like I'm here, I'm trying to just don't, like, I can get put off by stuff like that. I'm like,
oh, me too, man. Me too.
When I met a pediatrician one time, and I was like, hi, nice to meet you. Put my hand out, and she like, I don't know what she was doing, but she kind of clawed the palm of my hand. Like, I don't even know what, she kind of almost like pinched the palm of my hand with her hand. I was like, oh no, this is not our pediatrician. That is not happening. We're not doing this. And so we're getting out of here right now. So you find, you find what works for you. So the last option was, well, let's check the local public school. And the day before we had to go to the open house, the teacher that would have been my son's homeroom teacher was arrested because she was swerving all over the road high on Oxycontin.
Holy
and I was like, I've
God,
been talking
send
about
me a
this
sign.
Yeah, I know. It's like
Okay.
one of those moments where I was like, because we're talking about like, okay, do you have all your notes? Do you know the teacher's name? Do you know this? Where you're going? We're gonna bring the kid in. We're gonna meet the teacher, and the teacher gets arrested for a DUI, and you're like, fuck this. Like,
Message received.
I threw my hands up and I said, well, if we had, it can't be a one-off. And what I've learned is, it's not a one-off. There's kind of a lot of that. Unfortunately, it's rural living, and there's a lot of people who, they have problems. So,
Yeah.
and it turns out that some of those people can be teachers and teachers' aides and bus drivers and. So I said, well, hey, he's 5. I can do this. Like, I'm already home. I'm already doing all this other stuff. So let's give it a whack. So, by age 6, both my kids could read at like a 4th grade level by age 6. So I was like, I think I'm doing okay. And they love
That's
to
good.
read. So yeah, and they're way above their reading level. They're way above their math levels. And so I just kind of, every year we reassess it and we say, well, what am I not doing that I could be doing, or what is it that they need? And we assess those things when we get there. But you're always just trying to tweak something. If I'm not meeting a need that they have, then I find somebody who can, right? And that's the great thing about the internet, is that, hey, if I don't understand a thing in calculus, I'm sure somebody can figure it out. Like, somebody's got a video out there. And if you've got a visual learner, great. The video is a great way to do it. And then they don't have to go sit in that situation. And so, that worked out.
Yeah. I mean, it's just kind of like the farm, right? If there's an impediment, if there's a problem, you need to go and find the unlock that brings the harmony back again. But I've got a few questions about that. So it sounds like you didn't go with like a pre-made curriculum by some, like, homeschooling startup or anything like that. You decided to kind of put it together yourself. Is that correct?
Yeah, early stages, it was just, my thought process was something like, let's introduce the kids to everything, and let's see what they like. Because
totally.
Like if I've got food scraps, I throw them up to my chickens and I watch them. What do they eat first? What do they eat second? What do they ignore? Right? Like, what do they come back to later after there's bugs on it? Right? That kind of stuff. And so I do the same thing. And like one of the first principles or concepts in permaculture is observe and then interact. First, sit back and watch, see what you're dealing with, then go play. Right? Like, so find out what your kids really like to do. You have to learn to read. I had some basic rules. You have to learn to read. Whatever you want to read, my library is open to you, right? So we've got the public library. By all means, pick anything you want, obviously within reason, right? For a 7-year-old, there's some stuff that you probably like, well, there's this section over here. We'll just avoid that for now. But but you give them, and my mindset was always give them a little bit more than you think they might be able to handle, and see what they do with it. Right? Because then you'll find out where their edges are, right? If you've got a kid that, let's say you've got a kid and he's in 5th grade and he's supposed to be doing, whatever for math, and he's way above that level intellectually, but he's waiting on everybody else in that class. Like, you teach the lesson and then he just sits there and he's like, I got it. Let's go, lady. Hurry up. Let's move it along. He's stuck. You can't go any further because you got to wait another 9 months or whatever it is before you get to the next level of math. So, like, if he excels at math, let him excel. Like, let that kid hit the gas pedal until he hits a spot where he's like, all right, I got to hit the brakes. Same thing with reading. So my mentality was just give them as much as they can handle without stressing them out, and let them come to it as they wish, right? So like a very unstructured, I would say at my early process was unschooling. Like, I'm not gonna tell you have to read. I'm just gonna put the books out. And when you get bored of playing with Legos or playing with Kinects or playing with Barbies or playing with whatever, maybe you sit down with a book. And it turns out they kind of do. Like, if you have it, they'll pick it up. I never forced them, unless it was like, hey, you started this book, you're 3/4 of the way through it. I want to know the ending, but I don't want to have to read it. Can you finish it and then tell me the story? And they like that stuff, right? It's like, it's a way of getting a kid to do a thing, right? Like, I want to be involved, but I have other things I got to do. So can you do this for me and then tell me about it? Like, I want to ask questions. So there's those ways. Now that they're a little bit older, I mean, we're in like middle school, high school stuff now. And there are things that I don't have time to teach. Like, my son's in like advanced algebra. He's in like an honors algebra class, at what, 7th, 8th grade, whatever it is. And so I don't want to sit down and teach that. I could teach it, but I'm sure there's somebody that can teach it better. And there are some programs, and I'm not going to say which programs that we use, just because, I don't want to put too much of myself out there in that regard. But there are some, there's a lot of different things around, right? So like, there's like places like well, YouTube's great, but there are some structured programs that you can pay for, and then there are some structured programs that go through like your local ed, depending. There are some like offshoot public education resources. So if you don't, in where I live, if you don't send your kid to public school, they still have access to the public school library and all of the textbooks for the public school and all of the resources that those kids have. So like now with everything being like online and digital, all of the online digital stuff that the kids have at the local high school, I have access to, like, because I pay taxes, right?
Yeah.
So they're like, yeah, your kid can log on and they can do it themselves at home, and they provide the testing. But there's, we kind of like dip our toes in a lot of stuff, like make use of the public library, make use of the school library, make use of the school resources, but we buy other books. There's all the stuff that's on YouTube. There's a place called Khan Academy that works pretty well. And I think some of that stuff is free, and that's a great place to kind of start picking and choosing your battles when it comes to what you want to educate and what you don't.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
So
there's
it's a mix. Yeah.
That's a ton of resources online today. Like, as you mentioned a bunch of them there. And as you say, I mean, if you need to, even in our daily life, if you need to know something, you want to figure something else out, you want to learn about something, it's only a couple of Google searches away, and so it is kind of crazy that, well, I mean, as a result of being a public institution, government funded, there's a huge lag between the state of technology and the quality of solutions that are available and what's being offered through those, state institutions, let's say. But it's, and of course, the big kicker is the time and the effort required or at least the perceived time and effort on behalf of the parents required to avail of those, superior solutions that are now available, because, a lot of parents, by virtue of oftentimes their necessity to go to work and, whatever other reasons, it's just easier to convince yourself that the public school system is good enough and it's not going to have that negative an impact on your child, and therefore, like, everyone else is doing it, so I'm going to do it too. So one, kudos to you for not doing that, because I think we underweight or under index the negative influences that are received both by the education, the content of the education that's delivered, the method in which it's delivered in a very restrictive environment where, as you say, it's not catered one way or the other or customized. It's everyone in the same, category, and everyone learned the same thing, and everyone, very little variety. And of course, that doesn't seem, I think we would all agree that doesn't seem like the best way to cultivate an individual, right? Like we want them, as you say that you're doing with yours, you'd want to expose them to a lot of things and then see which ones they naturally gravitate towards, and then stoke that fire, and then see what kind of twists and turns it takes. And then, you're going to have to put in place some discipline and some limitations, because that's important in cultivating an individual as well. But in the right way, with the right touch. And it's, by the sounds of it, you've done your best to have that right touch, to kind of be there as a guardrail when needed, but also back off and let the kind of natural curiosity of their own intellect kind of steer them where they want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's the one best thing you can do for yourself, for a human, for an animal, for anything, is just, what do you need, and can I provide it? And give me feedback about what you're feeling and how you're attacking this, and we'll work with it from there, right? So, I mean, if
how do you cultivate a natural process? I mean, in permaculture or in education, it's kind of the same, right? It's like, okay, there's a circumstance, there's an environment here, and I have a want or a desire or a need. It has certain attributes. Okay, how do we find the synthesis between the two? And then, what is the kind of the minimally involved influence that I can have on this environment to allow its natural fruits to emerge? Let's say metaphorical fruits in the sense of an individual and their developing personality and character, or actual fruits in the sense of a tree.
Right. Yeah. You and the thing is, like, the good example that nature always gives is you can't force it, right? I can't go out and yell at bees and tell them to pollinate the trees if they're not into it, right? I can't. There's no forcing. I mean, modern ag kind of tries, and it's kind of working, or it kind of has worked for a while, but
Look at the cost
there's
though,
big
right?
failures and hiccups that go along the way. And yeah, exactly. It's there, you know, everybody's seen like the factory farms and what monocropping does and what happens with rivers when you over fertilize and get a heavy amount of rain. And this when you've got to rely on somebody somewhere to harvest your natural gas so you can make nitrogen fertilizer. I mean, like the web is just, it's enormous, right?
Mhm.
So if you could set up a system in whatever realm you're talking, whether it's growing your own food or raising out your kids, or pick a thing, the minimal amount of effort necessary to get the maximum reward, that's what I always try to do. If I could get 80% success for 5% effort, I'm not necessarily worried about putting in that much more effort to get another 20%. Right? It's like if I sit a kid down and I say, okay, listen, kiddo, we really do need to help pick up this math score because it's not going great right this second, and we need to get you caught up. What can we do? Well, we'll get you some practice notebooks. I'll give you some stuff. I'll assign some stuff. I'm gonna give you a smattering of different problems, because I don't know if this was the case, and maybe you can relate to this. When I was in high school, the way that we did math was essentially like algebra 1, then geometry, then algebra 2, then like trigonometry or whatever it was. And I sucked at algebra. Like it was terrible. And on top of that, I was out of school for a week. I'm not saying it was because I was an insubordinate piece of shit in school, but it was because I was an insubordinate piece of shit in school and I was not allowed to go to class for a week. If you ever point your finger and ask a question to an authority figure that doesn't like you, you might find yourself suspended.
Say that again.
So
And you cut out for a second. Point your finger and ask a question and say what?
I said, if you point your finger at an authority figure and ask a question that essentially they don't want to answer,
Right.
You might find yourself in school suspension, right? You might
Yeah.
get booted out of class, which I always thought was the dumbest thing, right? Like you're trying to get me an education, but if I ask a question in a way that you don't like it and you kick me out of class and now I have to miss a week's worth of class, how does that help me get an education?
Yeah.
That was, kind of one of those things that kind of always bothered me about the public school system, at least the one that I was involved in. But like, you just nudge them, right? Say like, okay, kiddo, here's where we need to get to, and how long do you think it will take us to get there, right? And you figure it out, right? So if you're a little slower in math, fine, right? So I bombed out at algebra the first time and I had to do summer school, which meant I was out of work. I was working at the time in 9th grade, and I was working on a charter boat fishing, and it's like, that's my summer. Like I can't be doing this. Like I'm losing out on hundreds of dollars a day because algebra, right? And because I got suspended, and it's like that shouldn't happen. But anyway, so I got through the summer school thing, got through algebra, and it turned out geometry is like that's my thing. Like I'm awesome with geometry. But they would not let me take geometry unless I passed algebra, which to me was insane. It was like, here's a thing I'm great at, and you're telling me I have to get through this thing that sucks for me before I can get to the thing I'm good at. What if I could find a way to get through what if I could find a way to make geometry sing with algebra, but I just need to do geometry first, right? Like that's some kids, that's some people. You need to, like if you want to, get into the Bitcoin conversation, where does everybody start? Everybody starts somewhere different. Depends on where you were when you started, what year it was, was the number up, was the number down, what was the debate, what was all this other bullshit that was going on the sides. Everybody kind of comes to it from their own angle, and to say that there's only one right angle to come at it from is ludicrous. It doesn't make any sense. So when you're trying to educate a child, just figure out what they're great at or what they're good at, and see if you can find a way to build off of that on the thing that they're not so great at.
Yeah. And have you found that they've naturally kind of gravitated towards unconventional studies, especially now as they're getting into kind of high school age, or have they just focused in on conventional ones and a different sort of weighting that you might expect in public schools?
Interesting question. I'm mostly hands off now.
Right.
So I kind of like we have this thing we talk about in our house. Every year, is this going to be a weird analogy or weird segue? Every year we get these birds, these little flycatcher birds, right? They eat flies and they make a nest on our porch. Every year they show up. The two birds show up. One calls to the other one. They hook up. They make a nest. They lay some eggs. And most years, all the little baby birds fly out at some point, right? We hear them cheeping. They're making a noise, and we're always excited to see, like, oh, are they going to pull it off this year, right? Like, are they going to make it? Because this is nature, right? Like sometimes it rains for 3 days straight, and there's not a lot of stuff to eat, and those baby birds suffer for it. But so 2 years ago, or actually, yeah, was it 2 years ago? Last year, maybe it was, whatever. The couple showed up. They laid their eggs. They made their nest. They did the whole thing, and they're feeding the little baby birds. And there's, I don't know if there's 5 little baby birds in the nest. These parents they're hustling, man. They're off the porch. They're getting a bug of some sort, fly, a moth, a cricket, whatever. They bring it back, feed it, and I mean they're all day long, back and forth, back and forth. These guys, they're running, they're flying their hearts out trying to feed these babies, and the babies get raised up. And sure enough, they sit on the edge of the nest and they test their wings, and they're flapping, and it's going to be just 2 days and these little birds are going to fly. And then sure enough, I wake up one day and there's no noise. I'm like, oh man, they must have flown off this morning. I missed it. Sucks. Because normally they fly around the porch and we get to hang out with them for a little while, and they fly off and they go learn to be adult birds. Presuming most of them, they get taken out by predators anyway, but that's aside from them. But anyway, so they fly off, and the mother bird kept coming back to the nest and screaming at the nest. And we had never seen this before. So I said, well, let me get a ladder and see what's going on. And there was another baby bird that refused to leave the nest. And the mother would not feed it. It was like, hey, wow, if you want to eat, you got to get out. Yeah, like, come on with us. You're big enough. You're strong enough. Flap them baby bird wings and let's go. It didn't. And she didn't feed it. And all the other ones that flew out, she was sitting there on the branches, picking bugs and feeding them to, teaching them how to do the hunting thing. And she just basically come to the conclusion, like, hey, this one's not worth saving. Wow. Right. So she's like, it's just, I don't have time to do, I can't be running like this all over the place. So that little bird died. And I went out like 2 days later, and
in the nest.
In the nest, and its little head was hanging off the side of the nest, and the flies show up. And kind of ironic, you're a flycatcher and you get eaten by flies, but that's nature. And so I had this talk with the kids. I was like, look, see guys, at some point
you better not stay home.
Yeah, at some point you're gonna have to fly. But that's the lesson, right? It's like at some point or another, I can't do it for you, right? I will read to you every night and I will teach you to read, but at some point I can't read it for you. Like if you want to read the Lord of the Rings, that's going to be on you, because that's a big set of books and I got to make dinner, right? Like, but you kind of have to, with kids, you kind of have to give them enough rope, and then you got to, help that little baby bird flap and help it fly, but you can't feed it forever. Right. And so like my thing with my kids is now with education is, you let me know what you need to do for school, and I will make sure you have the supplies you have. I will make sure you have the time and the connection and all the resources available to you. If you have questions, come ask me. We can talk about it. And we eat dinner together every night. So like we're always here, but I'm not going to be up your ass sideways trying to figure out like your school stuff. Like I want to ask you a question and say, how was school? When you're doing an online lesson or when you're working on a project, and I want to go, how was it? And I want them to say, good. And I go, what's your grade? I've got like a B+ in this subject. Cool. I'm good. Like we're good. Like, because I know they can read. I know they can do the math. They're, like I said, they're in advanced classes. So I'm not going to like harangue them over like that last, 5%, 10%. So it's mostly kind of hands off for me at this point, but if there ever were to become a moment where I have to be a little more hands-on, I'm more than welcome. I'm more than happy to do it. Because of course, you don't want to see your kids fail, right? I'm not gonna be that mother bird being like, I'm not feeding you unless you're 30 years old living in my basement. Get out.
Yeah.
Your mom needs some time.
I think it's also a big, a significant departure from the existing school system, in that, kind of giving, as you just said, you make them be responsible and in charge for their education. So you say, what is it you want to pursue, learn, et cetera? You tell me what you need and I'll help you get it. But I want you to be the one to decide what you think is interesting and what you want to learn. And like, I think that again helps foster a greater sense of responsibility, of agency in a young person, rather than you spend like 18 year or whatever when you start school. So like 14, 15 years of your life being told what to do. Study this, do this, get ready for this test, take this subject. This is what you're learning. This is what you're learning. This is what you're learning. And by the time, and maybe more if you go on to university afterwards, although there's obviously a little bit more choice involved there, but you get spit out at the end. And among other things, you're just a machine that knows how to do what it's told. Right. And
Absolutely,
rather
yeah.
than someone who has spent their life up to that point being the one determining for themselves what's meaningful, what's interesting, what they're willing to sacrifice, what they're willing to bear the responsibility in order to achieve or to learn or to pursue. And what are the differences between the two types of people that produces? And I would say they're vast, and we would probably all agree that the latter is a far more preferable outcome. Someone who's capable and willing to take the responsibility for their own cultivation, physically, intellectually, and otherwise. And what I think a lot of the problems that we have in the world today are due to an abdication of that. And certainly, and this happens through many different methods and many different forms of conditioning in society, but certainly the education system has to be one of the main culprits, because, you're locked in for 8 hours a day for 15 years of your early life. And basically all you're doing is what other people tell you to do. And you don't have any choice in the matter. I mean, how that is such a toxic environment and such a poor environment to cultivate an individual who's capable of thinking for themselves and taking responsibility for themselves and then deciding for themselves what they want to pursue. And so I think it's tremendously important that people are doing what you're doing, and hopefully more in the future, because I do think it's largely responsible for a lot of the problems we have today. And, as you were saying about your own experiences with math in high school, I mean, I couldn't even tell you what I learned in math in high school or junior high for that matter. But I do remember the anguish I felt at how much I disliked it and how difficult it was for me. And physics as well. I remember physics in high school. I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, it is just torture. And then, you take the exam and you're all stressed out and you barely scrape by. And it's like, for what? One, I'm not going to apply that stuff, in my life, most likely, because I don't have that natural inclination or interest in it. But what I found interesting is that, and what school lacks, and what it seems like, well, when you homeschool, you're more able to facilitate this, is I think what's missing is there needs to be a relevance to what you're learning, right? Like there needs to be a reason why you're learning what you're learning. And that reason has to be meaningful to the student, right? If they're just, told to learn a bunch of shit, then it's going to be torturous, or they're not going to care about it, or they're not going to engage in it fully. Whereas now, in my own personal example, I'm really enjoying studying physics now, because largely as a result of my interest in Bitcoin, I've become more interested in it. Now it has a strong relevance and there is a strong meaning to it. And so now all that disparate information that was just a chaos of like irrelevance before, now I want to see how it all fits together. I want to pursue all those different lines. I want to form order out of the chaos. And Bob's your uncle, I'm able to do so not only much more easily, but I actually enjoy it. Like, I'll take spare time to pursue it, something that once was torturous to me, and I think that the kicker there is that now it seems relevant. Now it's meaningful. And when you just throw kids in a random education, that's the same for everybody, that doesn't account for their interests and doesn't cultivate them, then you get an environment where they don't know why it is they're learning what they're learning. And you hear this all the time, kids are like, why the fuck am I learning calculus? I'm never going to use this in my life. Why is this a prerequisite for this course? I'm never going to use it. And you do that enough, and again, you're resigned to that, to acting in that way. You become conditioned to be like, all right, someone's telling me to do something that I don't want to do, and I don't even know why I'm doing it, but that's how it works. That's what I do. And then, you wind up a 40-year-old, a 50-year-old, a career of having done that. I'm doing it for the paycheck. I don't really get much out of it, but it is what it is. I'm told to do it this way. I need to do it this way. So I do it that way. And why do you think we have so many problems with substance abuse and mental health issues and all that kind of stuff? Because people are just crushed into becoming a robot, becoming someone that's told what to do. And then you sprinkle in a little, theft on top of that, and people can't, they don't even get to keep the fruits of that labor, and it's all made even worse. And this is why we Bitcoin, of course. But there's a lot wrapped up in it, I guess, is my point. And it's really refreshing to hear someone like yourself have such a thoughtful and productive approach to it, at least, for you and your family.
I certainly thank you for that. The one thing that always gets me is that it is a process, and whether you're talking Bitcoin, permaculture, education, everybody's going to start from a different spot, and everybody's going to find their own way. And to force somebody to follow a path that they don't want to follow, why? Maybe back when all you needed was factory workers and military people, maybe that was the way to do it, right? We could take all these schlubs off the farms. Now we've got tractors, so now we can just put these idiots behind a desk. We can teach them basic stuff, and we can get them out there, and we can produce widgets. And at the time, I guess maybe sure, right? That's not the way it works now, and it's not the way it works with agriculture. It's not the way it works with raising a human being, and it's not the way it works with money, right? So to your point, I didn't give a flying fuck about anything financial except for, hey, I was 20 years old before I understood what interest on a credit card was, right? Like I was dumb, financially dumb. And I was lucky I didn't need, but here's the point, right? I didn't need it. I always had work. I was either self-employed. I was self-employed technically from the time I was 12 until I got real legit jobs. And I always had a decent enough income where I didn't have to worry about a credit card. Debit cards really weren't a thing at the time. So nobody had to explain interest to me. And God forbid they do that in school. I mean, why would they do that in school, right? Whatever we do, let's not teach the kids about how the way the money works. What are we doing there, right? I mean, that should be a no-brainer. Why are we learning about some of the nonsense we're learning? Can we just do a course on economics? Can we do a course on finance? How to fucking balance a checkbook? I mean, for Christ's sakes, you learned all kinds of stuff in math class and never had to balance a checkbook? That's stupid.
100%.
So I always kind of thought if there is a better way, well, there has to be a better way, because this obviously isn't working. And well, let's see if we can't find it, so I remember getting a credit card and being this is interesting. And then I would use it, and then I would pay it off. And I never had a cycling debt or anything. So interest didn't mean anything to me. It was no, I just paid this couple of bucks or whatever, and whatever. But then I saw this right towards the end of the financial crisis, or maybe just before the financial crisis was the financial crisis. I sat down with a guy who was a mortgage broker, right? Because I was thinking this is the biggest mistake I almost made. I sat down with a mortgage guy, and I'm hey man, I got some money in the bank, and I hear housing is just going to the fucking moon. So what can you do for me? And he threw out some numbers, and he said, you could definitely afford this much house with this amount of interest and with this thing and that thing and the other thing. And I was that's a lot of house. That's a lot of house. And I thought to myself, and that's a lot of money. And I was starting to kind of can I really afford that kind of monthly payment? And I didn't know this at the time, but those guys aren't paid. They don't get paid if you can keep your mortgage payment. Right, they get paid on the day, and then after that, fuck you, right? Totally. And so I just happened to get lucky, and I met another guy who's so I realized okay, this mortgage thing, this number's not going to work for me. I need to be able to go places and do things and afford gas and food, and this guy's insane. So I put it off, and then a year later, the whole thing went to dog shit, right? But just in time for me to understand what an adjustable rate mortgage is and all these other things. And I learned it just as the whole thing went to shit. And I was holy hell, man, did I avoid the biggest mistake of my life? Because if I had just listened to that guy, just like you're talking about with elementary school, middle school, high school, hey, just listen to us, do the thing we tell you to do, and you'll be fine. Exactly. Go to college, get a degree in whatever, communications, basket weaving, whatever. You'll be a millionaire by the time you're 40. Like, okay, I guess I've been doing this since I was 5. So let's just keep doing what they tell me to do. And it was one of those moments where I was like, something seems a little off here. And man, when that whole thing unwound and everything went to shit, I was like, holy moly, I cannot believe that I avoided all that nonsense, because where would I be now? I wouldn't have my house. I wouldn't have my land. Probably wouldn't even have my wife. You know what I mean? Like, at that point, that would have been right out the window. Like, should have been like, what the fuck did you get us into? Like, that's a bridge too far, I love this woman with all my heart, and she is my biggest supporter and my best friend. But I don't know if I had turned $500,000 into $100,000, I think she'd be pretty pissed.
Right.
Yeah. Holy crap, But like you learn, right? And so then I was like, okay, I got to understand financial shit. But took a couple of years. Again, like, we did manage to pull it off with the house and the land, and we built up a pretty awesome thing. And along that path, kind of in step with permaculture, I started hearing things about Bitcoin. It's like Bitcoin, and it would pop up every once in a while. It wasn't like super on my radar, but when it would pop up, I'd go, huh, that seems interesting. Also seems kind of useless, but kind of seems interesting. And then I'd close the tab and I'd move on with my plants and kind of do my thing. And then I hear about it again. And it's like, did you know that the price is like going way up? And I was like, oh man, I should have gotten involved with that. And then 6 months later, it's like, everything's, it's all out the window. It's all over with. Forget it. If you didn't get in, you're done for. So I was like, eh. So I did that a few times. And then finally, like, was it a couple of years ago, I was like, let me do a little more research. I knew a little bit about financial stuff. I had a little bit of money kicking around, right? That's one good thing about the permaculture thing, is it really does put a dent in your food bill, right? It's like, okay, I don't have to pay for fertilizer. I don't have to pay for, a good majority of the vegetables and fruits and things that I eat. Animal stuff that takes care of itself. And so I was like, I got a little bit of pocket change. Like, what could I get into here? And it popped up at just one of those moments. It was like, we were in like a little bit of a dip, right? And I was like, huh. So I'm like looking at charts. I'm kind of trying to figure my way through this whole thing. And I just decided, my wife and the kids were on vacation. They were out of town, and I'm managing the homestead. And I talked to my wife and I said, hey, got a little bit of money. It's kind of burning a hole in my pocket. Got an idea. Want to try something? She's like, what? Bitcoin. She's like,
no.
And I said, it was funny because I said, remember when I asked you for if we could just blow $1,000 on a food forest? She's like, yeah, it seemed stupid at the time, but look what it turned into. Remember when I said, can you back me on this whole, like, getting 10 chickens that turned into 35 chickens? Like, yeah, like, it worked out, right? Like, that worked out. Remember when I said we should get rabbits and you weren't pumped about it, but then we built the cages and we built the hutches, and then now we have that resource. And it's like, yeah. I said, trust me on this one. And then she did. And I said, oh man, this is great. And I spent like those first few fucking months just looking at that chart, just, yes, it's going up. Like, this is the smartest fucking thing I ever did in my whole life.
I'm a genius.
I can't believe it. I just made us bazillionaires. I don't know how I did it. Right. Like, I just felt like it was one of those moments where I just stumbled into it. And you always feel like you stumbled into a thing at the right time, or at least it's been my luck that it's mostly been at the right time. And now we're here. So you go like, okay, well, I mean, I'm still as committed as ever, right? What it did is it fostered in me a wantonness to understand the underlying technology, right? The how everything kind of networks, right? And then you learn all kinds of interesting things about people, right? Like, you've got 10,000 different kinds of Bitcoiners, right? Like, there's people who are the maxis, and you've got, I'm not going to go through it, but there's 1,000 kinds of us, or 10,000 kinds, or 100,000 kinds, and it's always changing, and it's as dynamic as a forest. It's as dynamic as the brain of a child, right? It's like, it can go in so many different directions. And well, you do have off days, and you do have downtime, but what do you do with the downtime, right? What am I going to do in the winter when there's no apples on the tree? Cut it down? I mean, that's stupid, right? It's like, it's going to fruit again next year, right? So like, just wait, it'll be fine. And so like, you learn some humility, and you learn like, okay, again, I'm glad I didn't put my fucking entire family's fortune into this at the moment, but it's like a little nest egg, right? It's like just sitting there kind of waiting to launch. and I get to teach my kids about it, right? And so
Yeah,
that's the other fun thing. I pay my kids in sats for chores. It's
of
like,
course. How could you not?
right. It's like, it's just the easiest thing to do, because it's like, at the moment, it's like, I'm going to pay you 10,000 sats to go mow the lawn. And they're like, hell yeah, 10,000, anything, I'll do it. Right. And it's like, to me, it's like, oh, it's not that, on the front end, it's like, oh, it didn't cost me hardly anything to get that lawn mowed. I mean, it cost me
Well,
more for the
I'm sure
gas.
they'll be happy about it in 10 or 20 years, as long as
Exactly.
they hold on to it.
Right. Well, yeah, that's the thing. I'm holding keys right now. So it's like, you get yours when when you turn 18. You can do with it what you will then. But they love it, right? They like, they'll every morning, like, they're up before I get up. And like, this morning, I walk out of my bedroom. Hey guys, what's going on? I'll start breakfast here in a minute. And my son goes, "You hit 18 grand last night." I was like, "Oh, okay." Like, yeah, okay.
That's
I was like, "Well,
amazing.
don't
That's
worry about it,
amazing.
man. It's gonna be fine." And they go, "Yeah, it'll be fine." It's like, it's fun, because I mean, what else are you gonna do? It's a life, you know what I mean? Like, grow
Yeah.
some food, raise some kids, and then
And
the rest of
man,
it's just
if
fucking around.
if you and the gang are already got, experience waiting 12 years for a chestnut tree, I mean, you're primed to be hardened hodlers right off the bat, like, that you can delay gratification for a decade, no sweat, so it's like, don't worry, the seeds are planted. We just keep planting them, and then, one day we'll harvest them and everything will be great. So, I mean,
Absolutely.
I think people like yourself that have already, lived in, you have already interacted with things that require that degree of patience and delayed gratification are primed to be Bitcoiners. But it's interesting what we were saying earlier about how such intimate interaction with the natural world inculcates a certain ethic, right? Because the natural, and like this kind of leads into like a more spiritual discussion, and we don't have to go there, but just to say that it's just a fact that when you interface with something like the natural world, some complex absolute system, right, that can't be, it's not virtual, right, it is what it is. So you can't really negotiate with its fundamental parameters. You have to react to them. That inculcates a certain ethic, the ethic of patience, delayed gratification, respect, kind of keen observation, looking for ways to harmonize or synthesize, opposing forces, let's say.
Mm.
And I think Bitcoin represents a similar environment because of its absoluteness, because of its characteristics. And yeah, I talk about this all the time on the podcast because I'm so intrigued and fascinated with the personal and individual like character changes that seem to occur in people as a result of learning about and interacting with Bitcoin. And I think it's a similar thing, right? You're interfacing with another system that is both kind of absolute in a sense, but also tremendously relevant in terms of the different applications it has for your life, right? So money being the tool that you use to move yourself through the world, both through space and time, trading with people, saving for the future, all that kind of stuff. So it's extremely relevant, as is the natural world, because that's your sustenance, that's the environment you live in, that's what you rely on for safety and security. And so they're both like extremely relevant domains or environments that you have to interface with. And as a result of that and their unshaking sort of absoluteness, it's almost impossible that an ethic is not going to be transmitted, or like there's not going to be a feedback between the two that generates a type of ethic as a result of that circumstance. And that genuinely seems to be the case, and so it's a very interesting question to discuss and think about. Is like, well, what ethic is it, right? Can we identify the ethics that are being that are emerging as a result of this relationship of feedback between both ourselves and these different environments? Now, you might be able to extend that and say, like, an ethic is kind of always generated when you have a relationship of any kind between yourself and anything. But perhaps by virtue of the importance or the absoluteness of the thing that you're interfacing with, the thing that you're in a feedback relationship with, then maybe the ethic is more profound or more fundamental or more important or something like that. But it does seem to be the case. And it's tremendously interesting to try to tease out what it might be. And then, how is it that these things have those characteristics, those attributes, that quote unquote nature, such that it's able to participate in the emergence of an ethic like that? And again, we wind up in weird territory when we speculate on why that might be the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you were talking, it made me think that between the three things that we've discussed, permaculture, education, and Bitcoin, what it makes me think is I have this incredible urge to protect it. Like, you're not taking this from me, right? Like, this is my food. This is my land. This is my joy, right? This is like where there's so many memories, right? Like, we've got an apple tree that's named after a chicken that we had for, like, it was this goofy ass fucking chicken. It was the poorest, piss poor, shitty little bird that ever existed, but god damn it, he was cute, right? And like, he did his best, but he was kind of twisted in the head. He definitely wasn't the brightest bird on the planet. Like, eventually things got, it got, well, he passed, right? So it didn't work out for him. But he was like it was like that little misfit chicken. He was like, this shitty little chicken. But I love the little bastard, right? And so, like, we had to go out and we had to bury that chicken. And then we dug a hole and we put the chicken in the hole and we covered it up and we put a stone on it so that the coyotes wouldn't dig it up. And then, it's like the next spring when that apple tree bloomed, we're like, that's that chicken, right? Like, that's our little buddy, right? Like, he's kind of part of that tree now. And so, like, now when I tell, we talk to the kids, like, hey, it's time to go harvest apples. I need you to go check on the Polish tree. And his name is Polish. And it's like, go check the Polish. Like, so now that tree has a story, right? Like that, like, and I want to protect that. Like, I'm not going to just, if somebody walked up to me and said, hey, I'll give you X number of dollars for your land, that number is going to have to be in excess of 10x what it's worth, right? Because, like, there's so much story here, right? Like, this tree has a name for a reason, right? For memories, like, that we built this up, like it was nothing but a hay field, and now it's a forest, right? Like, it produces more than I could ever want, and why would you not protect that, right? Same thing with kids, right? It's like, these are my kids. Like, I mean, I think any reasonable, any parent that's not an absolute dingbat would say that I would die for my kids. I would do anything for you. Like, there are things in my head that I would never consider doing if you weren't here, but now you're here, and damn it, I'm gonna, if it ever came, like, I'll throw old lady off the bridge if it means saving, like, whatever it takes. I mean, the day I found out that my son was like my wife was pregnant, I was like kind of a reckless, not super reckless, but I didn't necessarily wear a seatbelt, right? It's like, but like, I remember she's like, hey, I'm pregnant, and I had to go to work, and I was like, it was the first time I consciously was like, click the buckle, don't fuck this up. Someone's relying on you now.
Not just about me anymore. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's like, I mean, if I got in a wreck and went through the windshield, like, she could start over, right? We were young. So it's like, if I kill me, that sucks for her, but I killed me. But if I kill me doing something stupid, and that affects, like, these little people who I don't even know yet. And it's like, no, we're not doing that. Like, I'm going to protect this. Like, and if that means protecting myself, and that means, like, having the resources to protect them in as solid a way as I can, right? Like, it's not all money. It's not all, like, storing a bunch of whatever you think you might need if the world goes to garbage, right? It's like pieces. I need a little bit of this. I need a little bit of that. I need a little bit of food forest. I need a little bit of pork. I need a little bit of chicken. I need a little bit of red, like a little bit of everything, right? You piece it all in, and then it gives you, like, multiple layers of security mentally, where you can just say, okay, now this is, like, if the cherry trees don't flower this year, I'm fine. If the apple trees don't flower, I'm fine. Like, that doesn't bother me at all. Like, if my male rabbit dies, well, it's going to be a little while before I can get another one, but that doesn't break my bank, right? So, and it's the same thing, whether it's, like I said, whether it's permaculture stuff or it's the education of your children. Why wouldn't you take that on if you if I understand some people can't, and I would encourage anybody who thinks they can't, give it a whack. I mean, if you spent the first 4 years of their life with them and you're thinking about sending them off to school, hey, give it another year, give it 2 more years if it's possible, because you might end up with a way better result than you could think, right? You can go to the store, buy a tomato, or you can plant that tomato, that tomato plant. That tomato that you grow is going to be way better than the one you buy. That kid that you send to school is like factory farmed tomatoes.
Right.
And it's your kid, but kind of is it? I mean, that's the thing that I always get. It's like I see some kids, we walk around town and I see these kids, their like heads are hanging and they just look like pale and medicated out of their brains. And I'm like, holy hell, And then I sit back and I watch a video of my kids in like Taekwondo and I'm like, oh yeah, no, my kids are badass, right? It's like they're like little warrior, soldier, smart people. It's like, what the hell is all that? Like, who did this? And then I go like, oh yeah, I kind of had a hand in that, right? And like all these decisions that you make, you go, well, somebody has to take control of it, and like, why not you? And wouldn't you protect it as best you could? And so the same thing for Bitcoin, right? It's like once you kind of get started and you kind of understand it, you go, oh, this is another piece to this puzzle, and I have to protect this. Like, yeah, like hang on to that and like hodl, right?
Yeah.
Don't let go.
I love the term warrior, soldier, smart people. that's what you want to feel when you look at your kids.
Yeah.
But it's, again, the parallels are so, there's so many apt parallels, because like what you're doing, you seem to be doing in the permaculture arena, right? Like you're observing this environment and then you're trying to either get things out of the way or add things to what's happening there to find a better and better equilibrium, right? And so, and if you do that successfully, if you engage in that process successfully, a better equilibrium is found and a better outcome is produced. And I would say that's a pretty darn good way to characterize or define truth, right? Like you're increasingly finding an equilibrium that generates a better outcome. And so you might say that when you find an activity, or when that happens, I think you can reasonably call that, truth, or at least a better truth, like the proof is in the pudding sort of thing. And again, the example with factory farming and monoculture agriculture and all that kind of stuff, and what it does to the land as a result, partially as a result, because all these things are multifaceted, but as a result of what's wrong with the money, right? Because you could also look at it and say, like, farming, in a sense, like you grow those raspberries and you grow those root vegetables and you grow those chickens, and so they transmuted the energy from the sun or from the bugs into their form, right? And then you take their energy and put it into your form, and it's kind of becoming more complex and more adaptable, more transmissible, more versatile as it goes up that chain. And money is kind of that thing that we've all just coalesced on, is like maybe the pinnacle of that, the thing that could kind of is most versatile, most adaptable, condensed form of value, or condensed form of energy, if you want to use that terminology. And when that becomes corrupted, I think it, like, if that kind of concentration is building up and it's kind of finding those harmonies all along the way toward better and better outcomes, when you corrupt the kind of thing that's meant to be the pinnacle of that, it sends that disorder all the way back down the chain, right? So when you have a system that's predicated on an extremely corrupt money that is not performing the function that it's meant to perform, that is not really a distillation of the most refined form of energy or optionality that we have available to us, well, look what it does to the land. Look what it does to the source, the ultimate source of everything that it represents. It destroys it, right? It forces people to squeeze more and more and more out of it, just for a little bit more, just a little bit more, because the money isn't doing the job it's supposed to do. And so you get this chaos, you get this degeneration, you get this disintegration, versus when those connections, when that process is properly constituted, you are able to regenerate the land using, this can be applied to many circumstances, but in this case, talking about agriculture, because it is doing its job. It is preserving that chain of energy, or chain of complexity or capacity or versatility for value. And it's just so interesting that here we are, like Bitcoin is very new. It's only 13 or so years old. And already we're seeing this impulse. And I'm not, as you said before, people come into it for different reasons and it has different meanings to different people. But just the natural incentives are beginning to align, and people are realizing the possibilities that now exist. And it's permitting people to have the type of attitude that you've articulated here today in relation to something like permaculture. Like, I don't need to like be on the window and snipe out those blue jays if they're picking off some of those cherries, because that's my yield, right? And I need to maximize my yield just to get by, just to survive, just to put food on the table. No, I can have a more relaxed approach. I can have a more grateful approach. I can have a more generous or compassionate approach. Again, the ethic permeating through. And I can say, no, you can eat that. Maybe my quote unquote yield will be down 20%, 30%, 40% as a result of whatever, rodents, birds, what have you. But everything is finding its proper balance, and all the different manifestations of increasingly complex energy, let's say, everything is in its proper order, and a greater order and a greater synthesis and harmony is taking shape as a result. And so does that not mean that it's true, that it's good? And I think it probably does. At least it makes pretty decent sense.
Absolutely. And I was just thinking, think about what it does to all these different aspects of your life. And then it made me think, like, look at when the degradation of something is just nonstop, look what it does to your soul. Look what it does to everything about you. You get disheartened, you kind of slump over and you go, God damn it, I got to do this thing again that I don't want to do. I have to suffer through this because this is the only thing I know how to do. And this is my one, right? If you have a job and that's your sole thing, like everybody around you is relying on that one thing. And you're now kind of if everybody were dependent on me to go out, collect the money so that we can go to the grocery store, we can, afford the things that we want to afford, pay the bills and blah, 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 blah. And I had nothing else to show for it. Where am I in 10 years, right? If I took that $1,000 10 years ago, 12 years ago, wherever it was, and I just went to the casino, could I have hit it big? Yeah, but I had $1,000 and I said, what if I just put it into something? And the plan was, well, let's put it into a lot of different things, and let's put it into things that'll kind of produce for us right off the bat. Like, these things we'll be able to harvest something from these raspberries this year, right? The grapes, maybe we'll get something next year, but then we'll also have raspberries, right? Because the raspberries are still going to be there. And then in 3 years, I'll have hazelnuts to go along with the raspberries and the grapes. And then in 5 years, 6 years, I'll have apples to go along with all that. And then, if I'm lucky, maybe these chestnuts work out. And then, damn it, didn't they, right? So every step of putting a little bit here, and it's a little bit of effort at the beginning. I could have done that thing where you go I got $1,000 and I'm miserable and I hate my life and fuck it, I'm just gonna pick a thing, right? Pick your poison. You could do that, right? And it's like a Band-Aid, and it covers the very tiniest part of your heart, and it doesn't do anything for you in the long run. You have to make a decision and say, well, what do I want for later, right? It's so, okay, I took $1,000 and I put it into these 50 different plants, and some of them died. That sucked, right? It's I nursed this thing for 3 years. I put in all the effort, and then dead. We had one harsh winter, and one of the 2, 3, 4 of the trees, whatever it was, they just died. They got frozen out. It's negative 30 degrees. You know what I mean? That shit sucks. But it happens, right? But if everything I had was in those 3 trees, I'd be miserable. But I put it into 50 different things, and so 47 out of 50, not bad. You go that's like food for the soul, right? You kind of go it's a small, relatively small investment up front, a lot of work, right? And then the workload gets easier the further out in time you go. And then it's just it's so nourishing to your soul to see it happen, right? I don't have to do anything. I spent 20 minutes in the beginning of the year trimming back my grape arbor. I have probably, no doubt, there's at least 250 pounds of grapes out there, right? Like, I'm not worried about grapes, right? Like, that blue jay shows up, that squirrel shows up, and they sit on my porch railing. I'm like, can you just not leave the hole on the porch, like you're staining the porch? Like, that's my biggest concern, is like, don't make a mess on my porch. Like, at least take it off and fly over to the fence and eat it there, right? Or whatever it is. I'm not worried about that. And so every time something happens, there's a little hiccup, I go, well, yeah, I got like 50 other things going on. So, and they're all doing well. And next year, 47 out of 50 things are going to work and 3 won't. And it's going to be that perpetual cycle, presumably until the day I die. And it's like, yeah, that gives you peace of mind on the, for that on the food front. And then you could put that into the education for my children. I don't have to put in all that crazy effort medicating my kid, making sure they get on the bus, making sure that they have this, that, and the other thing to go to school. It's like, hey, what are you working on today, kiddo? Oh, I got a social studies assignment that I got to hand in, and I got this, that, and the other thing. I got an art project to do. And it's like, cool, you good? Yeah, I'm good. When's your break? And the cool thing about that is they can take a break whenever they want. My kids wake up in the morning, they putz around, we eat breakfast. It's kind of like a laxed morning. It's like, here's your breakfast. Eat your breakfast while you check the price of Bitcoin, or play a little game online, right? Like, this is what they do, right? It's like they enjoy it. No one's forcing them to do it. It's like, what are you looking at? It's like, yeah, like, okay, I'll tie 2 things together. My son, he got really involved in looking at the Bitcoin charts, right? It's like, oh, this one, it went up, oh, it went down, oh, what's this candle mean, what's that candle mean, all these things, right? He's like looking at this all the time because he's kind of invested, right? He's got something in this, right? Like, he gets paid in Bitcoin, so this is kind of important. When number goes up, yay for me. Number goes down, well, we'll just hang on to it. And he's a hodler, so we're good to go. But then he's the one that's in charge of our chicken coop. He has to make sure that they have feed, that they have water, that he's collecting eggs and all this other stuff. And so he's got his own little economy. And so now every day he goes outside and it's like, hey, how many eggs do you think we're going to get? And we all make a guess. And it's, we're usually close, but you get some number. And then he has his own little chart that's on the refrigerator. It's like, this is how many we got. And we can look at the patterns and say, oh yeah, look, in August it was like this. And in September it kind of did this thing. And then it's gonna peter off for the winter, and then in the springtime they'll kick back into egg laying. And this chart like shows a truth, right? It's like there's no denying it. Either the eggs are there or they're not, and he's into it, right? It's like, I didn't sit him down and say, you need to make a chart for our eggs so that we know exactly whether or not we're getting the right bang for our buck when it comes to feed, and do we need to like whatever. He just did it on his own. He's like, yeah, this is a thing. I saw that you could build a chart with data that tells you the truth. And here's a chart on the fridge with data that tells you the truth. And so it's like, yeah, I didn't have to do that. They did it.
Yeah.
And there's like 1,000 examples of that every day of my life. And so like, that's food for the soul,
Totally.
Like, it makes it so easy to just accept things for what they are, right? So that was the other thing I was going to say on your last comment. It makes it easy to let go of stuff that's not working, right? When you've got a lot of things that are working for you, it's okay to have a thing that sucks, right? So, you have a bad year with this fruit. Okay, fine, not a worry, right? I'm not worried about it because there'll be something else later. Or, hey, my kid went to Taekwondo a couple of weeks ago, and in a free fight, she fell and broke her arm. It's like, ooh, that's rough. But it's like, how you doing, kiddo? It's like, hey, we can work around it. I don't have to worry about, is there going to be a problem with other kids, like on a bus, or are you going to, is this going to be a problem at school? Or are they going to give you the leeway to be able to make up assignments because you can't write right now? It's like, no, we don't have to worry about that. I can put the school stuff aside. She can heal up. And then when she's ready, she can get back to it. So it's like, it's freedom, right? It's like, there's all these little, when you design a system that you can nudge in certain directions and flow with, you're good to go.
Yeah.
It makes it easy to say, well, it's raining, so not that thing today. Or, hey, it's snowing, and you guys want to do it with the snowblower, or you want to go out there and take a physical challenge and do it with the shovels, Like, I mean, we do goofy shit like that. It's amazing, like the fun you can have with work, even that kind of stuff, because you don't have to worry about it, right? It's like, do we need to get the snow moved in an hour, or can it be 3 hours? Let's have fun with it.
And I think I love that attitude. And I think that's extremely well put. But I think that's another example of how truth can be discerned. Like I think something about the reason why we call it disintegrated and integrated, I think like when you're integrated properly, then that state and however you apply it is sustaining in the optimal way. It's also nourishing. It's also revitalizing. It's energy giving rather than energy taking. It's enjoyment rather than suffering. Like that is kind of, and this may be like tautological in a sense, but I think that's what like the harmonious or integrated state produces. And you can apply that to an individual internally. You can apply that to the state of nature. You can apply that to a relationship between those two, or many different relationships. Like when the relationship or when the activities or when the environment produces that result, I think that's what happens. Sustainability, harmonization, complexification, diversity, enjoyment, versus when it's not, when forces are too much in opposition to one another, then you get degradation and disintegration. You get the destruction of the land, you get the destruction of the individual, you get despair, you get, all these problems that we often point out. And so I think, again, that can really point to not only that you're on the right path and that what you're pursuing is quote unquote true, but I also think it says something about, the grander structure that we're operating within, that when you operate in a particular manner, when you engage in a particular manner, it produces this set of states or outcomes or results or emotions or sentiments or feelings or whatever, both internally and externally. And when you engage in an alternative way, it produces these. And like, again, I think we both agree, and many of us would agree, like if the former was all the states that you just mentioned, well, that is probably mean that it's more true and it's more right and it's more good when the outcomes of our actions have those qualities of sustainability, of nourishment, of energy. And we seem as a society to, we're in this hyper materialistic analytical world today where like everything has to jump off of a spreadsheet, and it has to be put in that context rather than being able to step back and assess things through a different sort of rubric, and looking at it through that lens and saying like, no, this is a far more sensible way to appraise our behavior, or to determine what our actions should be, and that kind of a stuff. What results does it produce? Not like what some isolated metric on a spreadsheet says. And again, this is one of the critiques of like, gigantic monocrop agriculture. And the reason why they can't have the attitude that you had about the grapes or the seasonality of the cherries or whatever. It's like, oh shit, like some bug came and destroyed my wheat crop, and now I'm fucked. And because I'm saving in a money that's rapidly losing its value, and now my yield is decimated for the year, and my land, which I've been squeezing for the last decade, is, there's so much cost associated with just putting it in a position that it can even grow, all the fertilizer and everything else I have to jack into it because it's so depleted. Well, then you're in a much more anxious state, right? You've put yourself in such a precarious position that it sucks all the joy out of life, right? Because you're at the behest constantly of the chaos of the world. You haven't insulated yourself from it. You've made yourself more susceptible to it. And there's such a lesson there in how the different approach is taken can not only put you in a position where you're more capable of confronting the chaos of the world, but actually by virtue of that and by virtue of how you do it, it actually animates your life with, joy in all of its different manifestations. And that's inclusive of the responsibility and the hardship that's part and parcel with that, but you accept it differently. And that's the key. And yeah, I mean, it seems like Bitcoin, to bring it back to Bitcoin. And again, like I realize these sorts of attitudes and insights are possible absent Bitcoin, and many people in different industries, permaculture and otherwise, have espoused them. But it seems like this sort of mentality is being incentivized or being discovered as a result of the attempt to understand and use and imagine a world where Bitcoin is a more foundational aspect and an upgraded form of money, a more upgraded and enhanced form of money than we've ever had, And so it's it's super interesting. And this is why I love having these conversations, because it's super interesting to hear all these stories about how people are thinking about it and how it's changed their perspective on things and how it's changed their life as a result. And, you know, it's been so cool to hear, especially the enthusiasm coming off of your voice when you tell me about, you know, how you've approached, you know, the farm, or how you've approached your kids' education and the different ways in which you've overcome like certain aspects of the challenges there. And it's it just seems right. That's the point, right? Like if are we not, even if you're not like a quote unquote philosopher who's really after truth, is not truth something like everyone kind of yearns for in their life, at least in some capacity? At least I would say for me, it is. And these stories and these examples and these circumstances that seem to be more and more prevalent now seem to be indicative of a fairly profound truth. And that's what makes all this so enticing and enjoyable to discuss.
Absolutely. I think no matter where you start, if I had started with Bitcoin, I would have found permaculture eventually. If I had started with homeschooling, I would have found permaculture eventually. And like that whole web, I think, like, when you find a thing that gives you control and peace of mind at the same time, and the more mature that system gets, the more you can let it go to do its own thing, the less you have to control it. Because like there's nothing worse than you were saying, like with monocrop stuff. If you have a great year, bumper crop, woohoo, let's go, let's party hard, right? Like, because next year might not be the same, right? So like you gotta, you know, save whatever you need for next year's seed, and hopefully we do it again. And if you don't, you have crop insurance, and you just hope there's not a tornado, and you go, let's see what happens. But it's like playing a slot machine, right? Like when you win, you win. When you lose, fuck, right? It's like, but when you put yourself into a longer term system where the rewards get better as you go, and the requirements of you are less and less over that time, I think you're doing the right thing. So
totally,
doesn't matter where you start. If I had started at Bitcoin, I'd probably be like, all right, I got a little more money to play with here. So we can do I can do a much bigger food forest. But and the same token, if I started with permaculture, and that gave me enough, let's say, control over some aspect of my budget, such that I could have some money to play with Bitcoin, right? So like the amount of food that I grow, I'm going to say, if I just had to make a wild guess, I think I'm probably doing 60% of my food off my land, and I spent $0 this year. Like, well, some pig feed, but I'm getting that back, right? So it's like,
you mean like a 60% yield, 40% loss sort of thing?
Well, like 60% of what I need to survive is coming off of my land.
Oh, I got you.
And the rest of it, okay, yeah. There's things that I like to eat that I can't do here, right? Like we were talking, like I can't put a cow on this land. It's just not for me. But I could do enough, and I can sell some of that stuff, or I can trade some of this. Like I've got neighbors, I trade eggs for stuff that I don't want to grow, right? There's some things that my neighbor grows, loves growing, and he's like, dude, I'm overwhelmed with XYZ. And I go, cool, need eggs, right? And sometimes I just give him eggs because I have them, right? It's like, I'm not asking you for anything back, but whatever, have you ever thought to this, like, if I keep giving you something and you keep taking it, at some point or another, you're going to want to reciprocate, right?
Yeah.
It's like, you can't help it, right? There's like that part of you that goes, man, this guy, I don't even know why I met this guy next door and he gave me a dozen eggs. Who the fuck is this guy just giving away food? Right? It's like, man, I literally handed them the box. I'm like, dude, I cannot fit these in my fridge. Can you please take them? And he was like, yeah. So now he's here full time and he grows a garden. He's like, dude, I can't deal with all of this, whatever it is, right? Like tomatoes or zucchini or peaches or whatever. He's like, there's too much of it. I need you to take it. It's like, I'll take it. And he knows that like some of what he gives me, I'm going to just turn around and give right to my chickens or to my pigs. Like he'll bring me a bucket full of zucchini. And it's like, dude, I'm not eating 25 pounds of zucchini this week. I know you're going to bring me 25 pounds more, but I will give you some bacon in the fall if you're okay with me just hucking zucchinis at these pigs. He's like, I don't care. I don't want it. Right. So it's like it becomes this thing that not only it's like the web just gets bigger and more interconnected the longer you play the game, and it never gets old. There's always a new thing. Right. So it's like, I'm gonna build a smoker, and I'm gonna smoke some sausages and smoke some bacon. And then the next time I see the neighbor, I go, hey man, try this. Let me know what you think. And it's like you build a community, right? It's like
Yeah.
there's a lot of it, right? So it's the same thing whether again back to Bitcoin, right? It's like you kind of dip your toe in, you go, let me at first you go like, let me take a little gamble on a thing, let's see what happens. And then you're like, there's a lot to this. There's a community, right? And like that's kind of how I found your show, right?
Mm-hmm.
I go out, I throw on, I grab my phone, I put my headphones in, and I listen to podcasts, right? And it's like, what am I listening to? I'm listening to all the things that are interesting to me, right? So like I'll throw on your show, and I'm sitting out there pulling weeds, and I'm just like putzing along, listening to you and Gigi laughing, and I'm like, this is fucking amazing, right? It's like I'm hanging out with people, and I don't even have to talk, and I just get to pull weeds, right? It's like this is, I mean, what more can you know? I mean, it's like it's kind of like peripheral, like it's like hanging out with people, but I'm also getting some shit done. And then
Mm-hmm.
before you know it, I'm through the garden, and all the weeds are gone, and I've got the mulch laid, and the rabbits are cleaned out, and I've done 10 other things. And it's like that 3 hours went flying by, and I didn't even think about what I was really doing, because I was just enjoying a thing that I'm interested in. And
Mm-hmm.
to me, what else are you supposed to be doing with your life?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I was going to ask you, like, and I kind of already know the response based on the last 2 hours of discussion we've been having, but it sounds like this is a lifestyle that you really enjoy. You're at peace. I'm sure there's things you want to accomplish. I'm sure there's always challenges, as we discussed, but like it sounds like you feel like this degree of control over your environment, over the different constituents of your life, and the life that it affords for you and your family. It sounds like you're happy with the lifestyle that you've created here. Am I right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I sit down at the end of the day, and when I first bought when my wife and I first bought our house, we had a little one. He was like one. And we're sitting in this house, and remember, it was like right at the end of all that financial chaos that it was basically like we just like, where's that movie where like they outrun the tornado by like a half a second? You know what I mean?
Twister, I
Like
think, right?
something like that, right?
Yeah.
It felt like that at that time. It was like, we're might get fucked on this one, right? And then you spit back out the other side of it, and it's like, holy shit. And then the storm clears and the sun comes out, and I'm sitting on my porch with my wife and my son, and my wife's pregnant with their second one. And I go, look at the view, and remember, like, we get to have all of this, like, even before it had any of the food forest, even before it had any of the gardens. It's like, it's just such a fucking awesome place to live. And we get to have this. And goddamn, I mean, I got it cheap too, right? Like, and that's the other thing that goes along with a lot of this. You don't need a lot of money to be happy. Like, I don't have to be overwhelmingly wealthy in like dollars, because I'm wealthy in like what I
Freedom.
have, the other stuff that I have. There's wealth in that freedom. There's wealth in that security. There's wealth in that, like, just the thing that we're building, and like it's getting better all the time. So it's kind of like every day I sit down, my wife and I, we sit down after we get the kids to bed and all that stuff. It's like, hey, good night, we'll see you in the morning, all that shit. And it's like, what's going on tomorrow? And it's like, whatever happens, let's see what happens. It's like I'm gonna wake up when I wake up, and then we're gonna do the day. And it's like, I don't know if I could wake up tomorrow and one of my pigs could be laying flat dead, and I'd be like, oh, that shit sucks. Because that's kind of, it's an investment, but it's not gonna break the bank. It's not gonna, I'm gonna have to dig a big hole, but I mean, like, just get the shovel and move on with it. You know what I mean? It's like, but I'm happy for every single moment that I get of it, because what else are you going to do? Are you going to go to a job? Are you going to, like, I mean, not that this isn't a job, but it's like, I've got flexible hours as much as I can possibly have. And obviously there's obligations outside of all this stuff, and people have to get places and do things, and money needs to be, earned and everything else. But when there's enough, how many apples do you need to eat? Right? It's like, well, what do you do with the extra ones? And that's the way I feel about dollars. It's kind of like, do you have enough? Yes, I have enough. Do you need more? I don't need more, but I'd like a few more, but I don't need to bust my hump and destroy my well-being and ruin my kids' lives and flatten my land in order to get 2x what I've got. I'm good.
Right.
It's like
You know, and
happiness is happiness, joy is joy, love is love, whatever. Money is whatever. You know what I mean? It's not the most concerning thing to me because I would never trade any of what I have for more of those green pieces of paper.
yeah. Well, that's exactly the point I was just going to bring up is like the distinction between wealth and money, or how one defines wealth, like all those things that you just mentioned, like love and freedom and joy, and all the stuff we've been discussing. I think we would both probably define those things as markers of true wealth, right? Not just another zero, another zero, another zero in the bank account, or even number zero on the Satoshi stack, as awesome as that would be, like, because, and this is a very important question because it will determine what motivates you, right? What you strive to achieve and build and accomplish and become. Like, what do you value? And as a result, what is wealth? And I do think, again, like, I think a lot of, and maybe it's a self-selection thing, people coming into Bitcoin, but I think it's also in large part these thoughts kind of emerging in Bitcoiners' heads, thinking about this stuff as a result of being involved in all this and trying to wrap their head around it. And this idea of like, well, what is it I'm really striving to accomplish here? Like, what is wealth to me? As a result, what kind of life do I want to build? And it seems to me that more and more are saying what you just said. It's like, do I really consider another big house or another car or, this or that material thing a marker of wealth? Does that really fill me up with the type of emotion that I've recognized is like the one that I want? Does it nourish me in that way? Does it lift me up in that way? Does it make me feel a sense of, that I'm in control of my life, that I have a certain degree of freedom, that I can actualize the things I want to actualize, that I can build what I want to build, both family and otherwise? I think a lot of people are coming to the conclusion, not really. Like, I don't see how another car is going to give me that, but I can see how having more independence over how I raise my kids, or the food that I eat, or the people that I interact with, or my own schedule, like all those things, those put me in a position where I'm able to feel those things that I genuinely get the most from more. I get to feel those more. So yeah, like I want to pursue things that are going to allow me to accumulate that type of wealth. And as you said, I think, many people are realizing that it's not just about more financial capacity. There's something else going on there. And it's really interesting to see this shift and to see people having these conversations. And like, I don't think it needs to be said, but I'm obviously not saying that money isn't important. And the more Satoshis you have into the future, the more you're going to be able to do those things that you do derive value from, and that do fulfill you, and that do help actualize things that you want to see in the world. But it's a market shift to be describing, or rather defining, wealth in these terms that you just did, rather than what has become, the norm and the dominant definition in the culture, which is just more stuff, right? More financial capacity and more stuff. And I have been having a lot of these conversations, and sometimes people say like, not every Bitcoiner wants to, move back to the land and start a farm and all that kind of stuff. And of course that's true. Absolutely. But I do think, for the reasons that we already described, Bitcoin, what it represents in terms of kind of bringing things back into alignment, tethering things back into reality, will serve to incentivize a more truthful congruence or integration with the forces of the environment that we must contend with. So those would be the natural world, as well as the social world, as well as the forces that are happening within ourselves. And so, I don't think everyone's going to become a farmer again, but I do think that element of genuine integration with fundamental and real aspects of the various environments that we're contending with will be brought back to those people. So even if, you don't appreciate the whole homesteading thing, I think we will continue to cultivate environments where that degree, that type of truthful relationship is more a part of all of our lives. And so you will be able to be exposed to that ethic that we were discussing earlier, even if you're not necessarily, tending your own land and growing your own chickens and growing, that kind of thing. I think it will permeate all the different environments that people seek meaning in, I guess is one way to put it.
Absolutely. I think, everybody has a path, and everybody should pursue the path that they feel is calling to them, right? You can't pursue every path, but I think when we're talking about things like anytime you can get control over something in your life where now it relieves you of the stress of having to worry about it, like I don't have to worry about my kid getting harassed at school by somebody, and then my kid having some sort of issue with that and not being able to come to me because we don't spend all the time together. And then that shit just gets worse and worse and worse, right? So it's like bullying, or, especially with social media nonsense and all that bullshit that goes on. Like I thought like, hey, you know what if I just took that part out of the equation, right? Like would things be less stressful? Would things be less shitty? And it turns out that, yeah, they are less stressful. They are less shitty, and nobody misses it, right? It's like, and so whatever you think is the path that you should pursue, when you find truth in that path, and by truth, I guess what I would mean is it working out for you the way you thought it would work out for you? And are you comfortable, or are you happy continuing on this path? Something like that, right? It's like, if I put this thing in the dirt and it grows and it makes me food and I don't have to stress out about that anymore, there's a truth there, right? Like if I put the time in and I teach the kids to read and to do some basic math, and then I let them pursue their dreams, and then they don't have to stumble into, some of that monocrop education, right? It's like,
right,
where, it's like the smart kid who, I knew kids in school who, because they were smart, they were punished because the teacher was like, you're getting ahead of me, you need to stop. And like, I think the worst thing you can do to a child's mind is to tell them not to think or to stop or to wait. It's like, no. If you want to read a book, read a book. If you don't want to go to math class right this second, well, I understand. You can review that lesson tomorrow. It does have to get done, but it doesn't have to get done because Miss Becky over here is screaming at you and it has to get done right now. Like, you know what it's like, right? It's like if you're stressed out about a thing and you got a shitty night's sleep, you'd like to sleep in, right? Well, that's not an option for kids in, the regular schooling system. They have to get up. That bus shows up at a certain time. You have math class at a certain time. There's no optionality here. And it's like, you can see how, like, you see these kids get driven nuts, and then it makes them hate. They don't hate learning. No child hates learning. They love to learn. They just hate being forced to do shit they don't want to do right now.
Yeah.
I hate doing shit I don't want to do right now. Right? It's like, hey, it's raining. I don't want to go out, and I'm not going to go out and weed my garden. I do have to feed my rabbits, but I mean, like, hey, you know what? There's obligations, there's things I have to do. But if I hated the rain that much, I wouldn't have the rabbits, right? Like, I'd find a way around. There's optionality, and let them find their path. You find your path. If it's not homesteading for you, great. Do a thing. Build on the Lightning Network. That's awesome, right? Like, go do that. I'm not that guy, but I will use it if you build it. Just like if I hand you eggs, you will eat them if you eat eggs, right? It's like, you don't want to raise chickens and kick around chicken shit. Fine, I'll do it for you. But also, could you just figure out a way that I can pay you in sats quick? You know what I mean? It's like, we'll find a way. You do your thing, I'll do my thing, but do a thing that you get enjoyment out of and that produces something long term. And I think it just makes for a better world. And I think to anybody who's thinking to themselves, I don't know where to start, or I'm just gonna like pick a cookie cutter path that I've seen, right? It's like, oh, there's permaculture, I'll just do that. Don't do that. Find a small thing, start there, plant the seed, see where it leads you. You might be a marketing person, you might be a tech person, you might be any kind of person, right? You might be the kind of person who's just, hey man, I invested in this thing in like 2010 and I just want to surf.
I'm
Dude,
done.
go surf. I want you to surf. I want you to surf and I want you to surf awesome and then put that shit online so I can watch it.
Yeah.
Right. Like, or
Yeah.
something. But I think you end up with better people that way. I think you've got
Totally.
a lot of people nowadays who are, they're driving themselves nuts they're trying to turn one of those giant cargo ships. They're trying to turn it way left and then way right, and they're wondering why nothing's changing. It's like because those things take a lot of time to turn, right? It's like it takes like I used to work on boats, and it's like takes like 2.5 miles or 3 miles or 7 miles to stop one of those damn things. And somehow you think like you're gonna change everything by protesting some dumb shit. It's like put the sign down, find a thing that's gonna make your heart feel fulfilled, and do that because this isn't working. Right? Everybody's kind of driving each other nuts. We don't need to do that. I want you to go and enjoy something. I want to see a smile on your face, and I don't give a flying fuck, about all the other nonsense that's between us, right? So it's like, go have fun, find your path, do that thing, and we'll all be better off for it. Everybody will.
Totally. Extremely well put, and I totally agree. And you mentioned the kind of fractal reflection, if you want to put it that way, or the same process happening on different scales. It's just always it's always so amusing how it shows up, like you were just saying about how kids in a class, they're being yelled at to learn a thing and they're like, I don't want to learn a thing. And as a result of being in that environment, either they get beat down, the teacher gets beat down, they're not cultivated in the right way, they end up not flourishing into what they could flourish into. The same is true for that like stalk of wheat right on that monoculture, the monocrop farm. It's like the piece of wheat's like, I don't want to grow that way. And they're like, you'll fucking grow that way. And here's the GMO, and here's the fertilizer, and here's the this and the that, and the pesticides, and then you will fucking grow the way I want you to grow, and as a result of that attitude, that way of engaging, that way of acting, you get degradation because it's not congruent with some broader principle about how flourishing takes place as a result of a harmonizing between forces rather than a clashing. And I think it perfectly applies to agriculture, it perfectly applies to education, it perfectly applies to the development of an individual, it perfectly applies to market dynamics, between market actors, between people in a society, and on and on and on and on. I'm sure we could identify a million more where that same principle acts in that way. And we should be more wise, and we should observe that more and do our best to apply it to as many of those areas as we can. And it's certainly been interesting to hear how you've done that in your life, man. And this has been great. I could go on forever, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. Was there anything wanted to get off your chest, or we didn't discuss that you wanted to touch on before we shut it down?
Well, I mean, I think I could talk forever because it's one of the things I'm actually pumped about doing all the time. Chatterbox, but maybe we could do it again sometime.
We'll definitely do it again, 100%.
We could talk psychedelics, we could talk rites of passage, we could talk some other interesting things, maybe.
Definitely. Well, let's talk. When should we do that? I mean, we could keep going right now.
Hit me. It's raining. I got jack shit to do.
All right. Well, you hit me. But either one of those things would be great.
Well, so I've always been interested with this concept, right? Passage rites for young people, right? This is a thing that I think. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and we just were let out of the house, right? It was just like, hey, go out and play. When should you be home? When the streetlights come on. Okay, I'll be back then. And whatever you got into, you got into. But if you got into some, trouble, you got yourself hurt, or, whatever, you kind of had to deal with that yourself. There was no like, oh, I skinned my knee, I got to text mom and have her come down to the park to come pick me up. Right. None of that shit. And I think one of the things that a lot of kids, a lot of people in general, I think people should have to go through some shit. Now, I prefer that they go through it voluntarily, right? But this is a thing. Passage rites have always interested me, whether you're talking about, like the bullet ant in the glove thing, wherever that goes on, like there's these things that kind of mark parts of your life, right? Like there's a moment where you don't walk, and then there's a moment where you do walk. And then part of the sacrifice of like learning to walk is you got to fall down and bump your ass a few times, right? But like you pay the price, right? You bump your ass, and then you learn to walk. If you bumped your ass and then you never got up again, where are you, right? So it happens as you grow, right? Like, and one of the great things about having my kids around all the time is that you get to see them do things that make your heart as a parent go, oh shit, right? It's like, oh my God. I like one time I'm inside the house, I'm working on cooking lunch, doing that thing. And my daughter's like 20 feet up in a tree, right? At like 5. She's 5 years old. She's 20 feet up in a tree, hanging there. And I'm like, I wanted to open the window and yell, like, if you fucking fall, you're going to bust your ass. But I think if I had done that, she'd have fallen because she'd have gotten nervous and she would have been taken out of the zone, right?
Right.
So it's like, let her do it. And then what happens if she falls? And I think this is a thing that like like you've heard the term helicopter parenting, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Have you heard lawnmower parents?
No.
A lawnmower parent isn't just the helicopter parent's watching the kid do everything from afar. Lawnmower parent is getting rid of all the obstacles in the way so that kid never has to have any struggle. And I see a lot of lawnmower parents out there clearing the grass, clearing the weeds, picking up the sticks, whatever. And it was a struggle when I was, as a young parent, right? You've got little kids and you love the living shit out of them and you don't want them to get hurt, but it's like kind of part of living is like getting hurt.
Yeah.
Like you're going to have to go through some shit, right? Like I told you earlier, my daughter had her arm broken at Taekwondo, and it's like, she didn't fall on the ground yelling and screaming. She fell on the ground. She went, ow. And she sat there for a minute, and my wife was like, can you get up? And she's like, I can't get up. My arm hurts. And it was like, she wasn't screaming, hollering, crying because she's fallen down a million times. She's not scared of falling down, but this time she fell and something wasn't working right, but she didn't freak out. She was like strong enough to know, okay, something's not working right here. We can sort it out. So they came home. I was like, all right, you still look like you're pretty banged up. Let me see if I can move your arm. And, if you've ever broken a bone and someone tries to move it, not fun, right? And so she's like, and she kind of, she teared up a little bit. I was like, all right, we'll get you to the hospital. We'll get this taken care of. That was it. It was no big to do. It wasn't an emotional nightmare for this child because she falls down and gets bumped all the time. She's bounced off a rock. She's fallen out of trees. She's gotten stuck in trees, right? She like runs through thorn bushes and, she comes home like bleeding half the time. It's like, why are you bleeding? I don't even know, Dad. And it's like, you went out, you weren't bleeding, and now you came home and you are bleeding. You don't know where you started that process happened. And it's like, no, this kid is made of fucking steel, right? She just plows through and she just does it. It's like, she just goes for it, right? It's like, when she was a little kid, she's like a little baby, and there was a bumblebee, and she's like looking at this little bumblebee. I don't know, she was even 2 years old. And she grabs the bumblebee, and the bumblebee does exactly what you think it does. It stung her. And she, ow. And she looked at her hand, and she went, ow. And then she shook her hand, and she was like, kind of like, oh, that sucked. And then the next, she didn't yell and scream and hoot and holler, and she didn't make a big to-do of it. This kid is like tough as nails. The next day, she goes outside, and there's a bumblebee. And it's like on a flower, and she's looking at it. And I go, remember what happened yesterday? And she goes, grabs the bumblebee, gets stung again. And she goes, oh, and then you could see in her head, she goes, that's what that was, right? Like, okay, now I get it, right? Like, this thing's not to be fucked with. But like, it's a little rite of passage when you're a little kid to get stung by a critter, right? It's like, she didn't flip out about it, because I didn't flip out about it, right? I wasn't like, oh, don't touch it. I didn't move the bumblebee out of the way. I let her have her moment, right? It's like, go ahead and do it again and see what happens, right? And so from like a little age, right, you gotta let kids do these things. And so I think what's missing in a lot of people's lives is these hard times that kind of make you stronger, right? So, you can take this, from like, little bumblebees to, I don't know, you want to walk on hot coals, you want to body suspension, right? Like the bullet ant glove thing. Like there's all these things that cultures have developed over time to basically say, hey, dude, it's time you toughen up. And I don't want to see any tears. And this is a test of you. This is not going to kill you, but it is going to suck. And can you handle it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
I totally agree. Sorry,
I was interested. Sorry, I think we're having a little bit of a connection thing there. But I was interested to hear your viewpoint on those types of things, because I know you're a Muay Thai guy, right?
Yeah, and almost a year now. I started doing BJJ last November, which has been great.
That's awesome. And so, like, how do you feel about those types of things when it comes to, expanding? What do you think that does for you, not in the physical, but in the mental?
Oh, it's massive. I'm a huge proponent that we've lost. Well, that the degree to which we have stopped doing these things like rites of passage in modern culture has been a huge detrimental thing, like, and of course it's been part of the reason why we probably have a lot of, teenage 40-year-olds, for lack of a better term, walking around the world today, because, and modernity has to a certain degree meant that people are insulated from the challenges of the world. Right. And so like it's easier. And so all the more reason that the challenges need to be actively and consciously injected into people's lives. And there's a reason why, most ancient cultures had some form of a rite of passage or a coming of age, because they realized the importance of that, not just of like being able to contend with a challenging situation, but also helping to orient your progress up until that point, realizing that there's going to come a time where you're going to be met with a challenge of some kind, after which it's like a clear line of demarcation for your development. It's like you were a kid, after this thing, you're an adult, and you're going to be treated like one, and you're going to be expected to act like one, and you're going to have to assume the responsibilities of one. Right. So it's like a very clear point. And as a result, it was a very important thing. And and we've lost that to our detriment, like I said. My own experience with martial arts, I think martial arts are a really good one, actually, because like it's hard this day and age to say like your rite of passage is to do like a week in the forest, for example. Did I lose you? Oh, I did lose you. You can jump back in.